we can actually start with the afternoon devoted to entrepreneurs, to being entrepreneurs. The goal is very easy, however, also quite complicated. We will try to provide answers to the most important questions that revolve around the role of an entrepreneur and of making entrepreneurship. We'll try to provide an answer to questions like, are you born entrepreneur or will you become one? Is there a perfect role model? What are the skills and competencies that entrepreneurs must have nowadays to tackle the challenges of the future? Are there any business models that are more effective compared to others? The afternoon, well, actually the whole session, also concluding the evening, represents a journey where we can all accept through the panelists' contributions, food for thought, interests, inspirations, to create the own identity as entrepreneur or to create the own enterprise. As I was saying before, and as it was anticipated by Robert Breghi, the person in charge of Lugano Living Lab from Lugano municipality, the afternoon takes place throughout the three main moments. The first moment is about to start and it's going to have its last panel at 4:30. Second part is starting at 5 p.m. with Mr. Giardinetti from Franklin University in the evening, which is going to conclude with a FACAP night. Hence, this is a quite tough and dense schedule, quite a valuable one and a rich one with many topical moments. I would then start with the first speaker of the day, Marco Dallago. With him, we are going to talk about being entrepreneur, the entrepreneur's skills, and we are also going to talk about academic projects that are somehow related to the idea of creating professional profiles, creating entrepreneurial skills. So my greeting to Marco. Hi, Marco. Hi, everyone. Hi, Davide. But before, thank you, of course, but before getting into the details, the part which mostly relates to entrepreneurship, we would like that you can summarize in a few minutes what your experience has been as an entrepreneur.
Right, I would love to. Thank you very much, Davide. And thank you everyone at Lugano Living Lab for organizing this event. Thank you to the listeners. And I'm one of the first speakers, so I will try to do my best not to bore you too much so you can also enjoy the rest of the session and the other speakers this afternoon. So yes, I would love to. I started some years ago, actually, with Clara Suistek. And this is Clarus in Latin, means bright or clear. So what we were trying to do was to make people more visible, in particular commuters. And so we're talking about people who go to work on their bike or now with electrical scooters or all the other novelties we have, and commute in general. So if you look at the statistics, in fact, of when accidents on the traffic accidents happened, especially lethal accidents for people using the bicycle, there was a very great connection between people who are going to work commuting and these traffic accidents. So we tried to look at how we could reduce the number of traffic accidents, and we had invented this jacket with high visibility. So there was this, on the back, there was this strip, and also on the front part of the jacket, so that the bikers would be more visible. It started almost like a game, because we were basically studying at the SUPSI master students at the university. We had some electronic engineers, also some IT engineers, and a guy from San Gallo studying finance. So basically, we put together this team of people And I have to say, it was not just to develop the project, but it was also to create a cohesive team of friends, let's say, whom we just had fun with. We worked well together and so on. And we were trying to find the best people that we had met in that particular moment at university substantially. So then we said, okay, so let's, take that jump. And we made this application for a business accelerator called Mass Challenge. And I think many of you know it. And when we started, in reality, it didn't exist in Switzerland yet. So we had to send the application to Boston or London, and we ended up in London. So part of the team went to London, and some of us commuted precisely to London back and forth from Milan. And it was extremely exciting. We were all very enthusiastic. It was a non-profit accelerator, so they wouldn't accept, let's say, they didn't take any shares from the company, and that was very important to us at the time, of course. And to us, it was a bit premature, probably, because in this business or entrepreneurship accelerator, basically, it pushes you very fast ahead to go to London to sell, to do networking, to find distributors and partners and so on. But at that time, we were still in a premature stage. I mean, we were still developing our products. So, I mean, maybe it was a bit, soon for us to do something like that, but it gave us a lot of value. I would do the same thing over again. But from the point of view of entrepreneurship, I think it's very important to really understand when is the right time to do what, and when is the right time to access these kinds of services. I would add that you could learn so much from the other businessmen, from the other startups that were part of it, because, they were more or less the same age as we were. So in the evenings, we would all meet up and we would discuss things. And I don't know, we would say, okay, I have to really negotiate this timesheet for an investment. And you would go to the investor next door and we would ask them, could you show us 2 or 3 timesheets of yours so we could compare, So these kinds of services were intangible value, but really priceless. And then, of course, we also were part of several incubators in Switzerland. In Ticino, for instance, we were supported by the group, or interregional group of development, and a startup center, and then also again in the region of Ticino. And this, especially in the beginning stages, in the early stages when we really needed that, was super, super important. So really, it's very difficult to develop hardware in general. We have had a lot of highs and lows. Anything you want to develop, even if it's a simple plastic cube or whatever. It seems easy to do, but you have to find the right molds. You have to make investments. You have to get the patent. You have to, distribute in various countries. You have different VAT systems. So, I mean, it seems simple, but really when you go and sell it, it's not that easy. Yes, it seems a little bit discouraging, right? For someone who's just starting to be an entrepreneur, and being an entrepreneur, because you're telling me that implies various elements, of course, that you need to consider. But what I am most attracted by in your story is the fact that you are also giving us, you're telling us it's very important to interact with other human beings and to exchange skills and competences. So enter into contact with other people who've already had that problem before you and solved it. So kind of the environment for the entrepreneur is very important, right? Absolutely, yes. I would say absolutely yes. Also, just academically and scientifically speaking, in terms of the networking, this is considered as one of the main stages for any entrepreneur. And that is what allows us to avoid certain problems. And in fact, I was a bit discouraging in my initial remarks, I know, and I want to apologize, but really what a lot of entrepreneurs say, not just me, when you ask them, what is the most important skill that you have to be a good entrepreneur? And I would say it's really a tolerance to pain, mental pain and suffering, because you're going to have so many highs and lows in your development. I mean, you're going to have really high peaks of enthusiasm because you learn so fast, but everything goes by much faster than in any other context, in my opinion. So you have to know that when you get an investment, that's because 99 investors said no before that one investor that said yes. So it's very discouraging, and you don't always obtain what you want to, and there are many conflicts to solve. Right. And in this very brief narrative that you are giving us now, which of course we will now try to go into detail with, what would you say was the most difficult moment or the turning point or maybe the most important obstacle that you had to overcome? Well, I would say that there were many. I think that one obstacle, a really important obstacle, was when an investor, let's say, we had received, almost received a strategic investment. Were right there on the verge of receiving it for that period. So we had, of course, gone through a lot of, we have based a lot of expectations on that and future perspectives. But then right when they were going to almost just do the money transfer, they refused this proposal, this investment proposal. And this happens all the time. So it was so disappointing. And then, of course, we reacted in a different way. We found a different solution. I mean, we didn't stay negative and didn't go on or anything. But that was a very complex situation where all our expectations were right there. And from one day to the next, we had to understand and study how we could reorganize the strategy and change our strategy substantially. So what happens, I think, in the life of an entrepreneur, and that's also why you say in academia, you say that the business plan is maybe not the first thing you should worry about, because your plans keep changing all the time, continuously. So your plan A becomes plan B, plan C, plan D, and so on. And you have to continuously be able to reinvent yourself and, yes, keep riding the wave. Right, so it's a kind of a capacity of also being flexible, right, depending on the different situations, different opportunities that you encounter, and also depending on what this evolution can bring on also in terms of positive things. But I would ask you, in your point of view, according to yourself, of course, you were talking just now about the fact that you were a team, you were a group of people who worked together on a project, correct? Yes, absolutely. So the fact that you were several people, right, working together, the fact that you were not alone, I mean, in the common imagination, I would say that people always think of the entrepreneur as some, self-made man who just by himself starts off in a garage and then makes it. I don't know if you also started in the garage, by the way, but I'm not sure. No, we didn't have a garage, but we had a very small office, so it was very similar. Right, so this legend of the self-made entrepreneur who builds his business by himself against all obstacles, is that true, or is it simply a legend? Or let's say, is it better to be a group of people? Is it something that also brings on certain benefits and gives you a better way of facing these obstacles and challenges? Well, people say, always ask me, okay, what's the best number of founders for a company or something? This is a question I often get. And usually people answer it's 3. 2 people is not enough and 4 people is too many. We were 5 at the time. And very soon, a couple of them decided to go part ways. And we divided the shares again. So they did something different professionally. But I think that it is extremely important to be more than one person. Yes, maybe not too many, but definitely just being one sole founder, it often doesn't work. But you have all kinds of exceptions in the world of entrepreneurship. And if you want to, you can even find many successful cases of people who've made it by themselves. On average, in my experience, I have to say that you have to have interdisciplinary skills. And this is something people often say. But that means that maybe you develop a technological project. You have one person who, technologically speaking, knows how to take you from a proof of concept to a prototype. So is able to go through various evolutions of the product. Because if you go to the suppliers, if you do outsourcing, right, for instance, and you go to suppliers, then what happens in the world of startups is that they usually will treat you, even if they can be enthusiastic about your project and everything, but they will just treat you as a client, one more client. So maybe they will invest slightly more in you, but not much. So what happens is that you need to do many more prototypes maybe than you had initially planned, and they will keep invoicing you, of course, even significant amounts. And so if you can do that initial stage internally and not get too discouraged, because we also, for instance, made the mistake that for some parts of the products, we had gone to China, we had outsourced to China, but then we had to do insourcing. We had to come back to Europe because we didn't have much luck with that. And what happens is that after an amount of prototypes, the supplier says, okay, now you've done 1,000 pieces, that's it for the prototypes. And you say, yeah, but I'm not done yet. Right? So you have to have someone in the team who can deal with that part and manage that. So you definitely need a visionary product manager, or maybe a sales guy, someone who can sell the product, sell the vision, sorry, more than the product. And that could be the CEO. So this is the person who will find the funding to develop the products and finds the clients on the other hand. And then definitely you need a technical person who understands the technical aspects. And then depending on what you're developing, you would need marketing people, or even someone who deals with the finance and so on. Okay, so you would say one skill that's oriented towards finance, another one that is based on sales in general, we could call it like that, and then another who is dealing with marketing. More than finance, maybe I would call it technology, because finance you don't necessarily need in the beginning. I mean, on the contrary, in the beginning, that's often not a priority, but someone who focuses on technology. So technology, marketing, sales, could we say that? These are the three main figures you need. If we were to start a startup, or if we were to launch a business, let's say, or had a particular product in mind that we want to launch on the market, at least you would need these three professionals in the beginning stages of the prototyping. Is that correct? Yes, I would say that's correct. I mean, the two most relevant are the sales guy or the visionary guy who's good at selling the vision and the products of the company, and then the technician who works on the technology. Then you could also have someone who deals with marketing, which is also very important in the startup phase. Yes, so let me ask you one more thing. For the people who are listening to us, in fact, I'm sure you're seeing the number that we have written on the screen. There is a telephone number, which is a WhatsApp number, where you can send any questions or comments you have for our speakers. And then in the end, we will also have time, and at the end of each speech, we will have a time to do Q&A sessions. So we will read the questions you send us to the speakers, and they will answer you. So you can use the number you are seeing now on the screen. I would like to ask you, how have you used this experience as an entrepreneur in the activity that you are currently engaging in, which is an academic activity, right? And where, if you allow me to say so, you are focusing on generating entrepreneurial attitudes or entrepreneurial skills. So what out of everything you've done out there on the field as an entrepreneur and as a businessman yourself are you applying now in academia? And if you could briefly describe also what project you are developing right now at SUPSI, at the university. Well, yes, absolutely. I would say that initially we redefined the concept of the course itself, because I tried to bring into the course everything that I would have found useful when I developed my startup, right? When I was studying at university. And especially I have studied the business accelerator or that I use, but also others. We're focusing on these things. But from the point of view of the entrepreneurial skills, I think it's good to develop two things mainly in young people. One is the technical skills. So if you have a startup, you need to be very good at doing everything, right? You need to be the best in class in product development, finance, marketing, intellectual property, if you have to deal with intellectual property. So really you have to be skilled in all these fields. Then there is another more important part, I think even more important, which is the capabilities. So this means you need to be tenacious, persistent, enduring, tolerant also, tolerate ambiguities, and the fact that you have a risky profession. And these are difficult things to teach, I can tell you. And in that course, therefore, that I'm teaching, we have the traditional blocks of marketing and everything else that you study usually, but we also try to associate students with some startup companies on the territory. So for instance, there are several startups that are selected every year And the students follow these entrepreneurs up close to when they develop a new solution or when they work out a new business model, for instance, for the startup company. And almost by osmosis, let's say, they understand what the entrepreneur is doing. Some even write their dissertation about it. So others do an internship or even find a job in the startup in question. So because the first thing we need to say is that developing an entrepreneurial mindset is not useful just to actually found a business or found a startup, but it's extremely important also to just be in a company, to join companies as an employee. We have seen big companies fail and go bankrupt in very short times in the past 10 years, right? For instance, I can think of the printed maps. When I was a young boy, for instance, and we would go on holiday with my dad, he would have this big paper map, would look at the map before he started or before he left, and then he would ask people for directions wherever we stopped, right? He would always ask someone. We were always lost somewhere. And then shortly after, on the internet, you could check on, I don't know, Michelin website or whatever. You could see the map where you were before you left, for instance. And very shortly after that, we got GPSs, which, of course, revolutionized all the other companies that were producing maps, and they went bankrupt. And the GPSs were then replaced by Google Maps, which is an app on our phone. So now that's also out of business. So the life cycle of products have really become much more limited, much more reduced. So I say that having an entrepreneurial mindset is important because also in those companies, you need to be able to change and innovate very quickly. So in this course, we try to follow the whole life cycle of the development of a company, study that. And recently we developed this new initiative, which is the SUPSI Entrepreneurial Club. And this is an initiative coordinated by the research department of SUPSI. And basically it involves all the departments of SUPSI, of the university. So the Innovative Technologies department where I work, the social department, so DEAS, and then the Education and Design department and the DFA. So basically, I was saying before that enterprises are interdisciplinary today. Teams are interdisciplinary. So it's difficult to see, I don't know, a team composed by 4 managerial engineers or 4 architects or 4 people with the same professional background. What we think is that it's meaningful to share our skills and to converge the various skills, the various competences and experiences we have in those departments into one direction to exchange our ideas and exchange our experiences. And that's one first goal that we are trying to achieve. Okay, so before I ask you another question, I have a question from our listeners, from our participants or our audience. Jacopo is asking, do I need to be a student at SUPSI to participate in this project? Well, let's say that SUPSI Entrepreneurial Club is an activity that was born tomorrow. I mean, it was born just very recently, and we are just making the first steps now. It's only beginning now, and we are also now understanding how it's going to work. But initially, yes, it has been conceived as an internal initiative, so people who are related to SUPSI. And this is something we have created, of course, to train and develop the skills of our students. But it is not an incubator. It's not a business incubator. There are other incubators close to us, but we try to develop this entrepreneurial mindset so that the others also the other incubators can be fueled by that. So initially I would say, yes, it's internal, but then later, maybe in the future, I won't be able to rule out that you could participate even if you're not a student at the university. Okay, so the project that you are heading has the goal, you're telling us, of creating an environment where anyone who wants to found a startup can find what you basically found when you started your company, which is a series of relationships and to be able to learn from best practices or from professional mentors so that you can get a more immediate and pragmatic knowledge of entrepreneurship. At the same time, you also are aiming at developing these entrepreneurial skills in your students. Is that right? Yes, in fact, what happens is that we already have some places inside SUPSI where ideas can be developed. So this project in reality seeks to put all of these things together, create a network. We're not creating something new, but these are all existing things. So for instance, entrepreneurship is taught in one way in the Faculty of Economics, while maybe it's taught in another way in another department. So we want these experiences to come together and to be shared and to enrich each other so we can all improve. This is the first thing, this alignment and coordination. Then we also want to integrate coaching services and enhance the ones that we already have. I was saying we have a hybrid model. So we also accompany the students, for instance, and to connect them with startups, and they have experiences there. And that is something very important, not just to develop the skills, but also for the capabilities. So the fact that you're going to have a risky profession, you have to be tenacious and so on. Right, so I want to ask you then the second question, which was a little bit one of the important goals of this session today, which is, okay, are you born an entrepreneur or can you become one? Is entrepreneurship something you can teach? Is it something you can learn to become an entrepreneur, or do you have to have that talent? I mean, I don't know if there's an answer to this, of course. Yes, well, in fact, this question is, of course, a known question. I mean, and there are many opinions regarding that. But first of all, I would think of the fact that entrepreneurship is there are many exceptions, as I was saying. You have Richard Branson, for instance, from Virgin, who created this gigantic company, and he admitted that he didn't know the difference between profit and revenues when he started. Then there are other entrepreneurs who are very erudite with 2 MBAs and a PhD and started very prestigious startups as well. So we have a little bit of everything. So if you ask me, can you teach someone to be an entrepreneur? My answer would probably be no. But if you want to rephrase the question and say, okay, but can we provide tools to people who choose to become entrepreneurs? So let's say help them to avoid some of the bruises and some of the pains that are involved in that risk. Then my answer is yes. I think we can provide those tools, and that is also what we are trying to do with these courses that follow the life cycle of a startup company. So as I was explaining before, it's not really, even from the point of view of the teaching, the key element is not teaching someone or the students to build a business plan. But if you study the life cycle of a startup, you will notice that the first stage is the discovery stage, where you discover your opportunities. And there you have certain methods like design thinking, which is something we teach, where you can improve, for instance, the skills of interviewing. So interviewing skills, customer immersion, as it's called, and really understanding if you are solving a problem and for that type of client or not. So if the solution is really specific enough for that type of problem. And then there are other methods that, for instance, allow you to prove hypotheses that you have made and whether they can come true or not. And later you can go on to an assessment stage of your ideas, and you can say, okay, so now we're going to see what the market of reference is, if there are many competitors, what is the best strategy also of the industry and of the team. And then from there, you can start to develop a business plan and try to raise funds and investments. So the traditional method of the business schools was, on the other hand, more just develop a business plan, a financial plan, look for investments. Then after that, you train your team, you validate your project only later, but that didn't work. It isn't working very much. So we're thinking of new models. Yes, maybe it didn't work also because the economic cycles have changed also, and society, right, is more liquid today. It's a different society compared to some years ago. In fact, another question that we would like to try to find an answer to this afternoon, and we're starting with you, so it's a big opportunity. All right, I'm going to mute my mic then. No, we're talking about the title, right? The title of our event. We also put in the year 2030. So I'm going to ask you, in your opinion, from an academic point of view, would you say that the way that society is changing, and you just told us because you're talking about changing business models and so on, society is evolving, it's changing more and more quickly. We're talking about skills. The skills that were valid some years ago, will they still be valid today or even in, I don't know, 2025 or 2030? And my second question is, what will be the most important skills, the most decisive skills, the most fundamental skills for an entrepreneur in the future? Well, that is also a very difficult question and complex question, but I would say that what has changed, I think, is a bit this passage from the vertical model to the horizontal model, if I may say so, because I think that the technical skills are still the foundation of many professions. I mean, when you hire someone, of course, and he needs to do coding or develop a software for you, he needs to have the technical skills to do that. But especially from the point of view of entrepreneurship, what happens is that maybe that person is really good at coding, but then he or she doesn't integrate well in the team. And these teams are, as I say, increasingly different and diverse, right? In the sense of diversity, because we are so used to working in different geographies with different cultures and different histories. So these capabilities, as I was saying before today, are becoming more and more important. They are really fundamental, and they will also be more and more important in the future due to, as you always say, artificial intelligence also that's going to replace certain issues such as, for instance, accounting, certain tasks that we carry out. So if you ask me what the fundamental skills are that you need to develop in the future, or in upcoming years, I would say that they are the ones that are linked to emotional intelligence, first of all. And I would also think of self-awareness, which is being aware of yourself. This, I think, is the most important one. So understanding what your strong points are, your weaknesses, your values and drivers, and how they impact other people, right? And this is really, really important, the self-awareness, because it's the first important aspect that also investors and mentors look at, that this startup is really coachable, that you can also change your opinions, that you are that you tolerate feedback, constructive feedback, obviously, and so on. So I think I would notice, sometimes you notice a very high self-irony or sarcasm or even self-confidence are a very useful tool. But I think, yes, self-awareness allows you to say, okay, I'm not so good at this. For instance, I'm not a very organized person. How can I improve, therefore, that part? Or I become very stressed when the deadlines come too close. So how can I anticipate my work? How can I manage my time better so I don't always have to rush towards the end? And that's one of the first aspects, I think. The second aspect is the aspect of self-regulation, which is the capacity of, yes, regulating yourself somehow. So controlling the impulses, emotional impulses that we are all subject to, and that you can usually have during a meeting, for example, when, I don't know, you don't get an investment, for instance, that happened to us, and certain conflicts arise. How do you manage them? How can you dominate your irrational side? For instance, in English, you say, how can you use this helicopter view? So kind of exit yourself and look at yourself from outside, understand how you got into that situation and how you can improve, and also stand in someone else's shoes, which is also not very simple to do. Yes, even I think one of the most difficult things to do, probably. Yes, exactly. And other skills could be linked to other capabilities, for instance, motivation. So trying to be positive, optimistic, and try to reach your goals. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you 1 second, because these are all skills that are linked to human beings, right? So you're talking about awareness, you're talking about this capacity of relating to other people, empathy, and so on. Does that mean that the digital skills are going to be less important in the future, do you think? Or do they still need to be developed, and are they maybe going to be even more important than the skills connected to emotional intelligence? Well, I think they're still going to be important, because when we do a course on digital transformation, for instance, we are often surprised when they talk about governance and cross-functional teams, and you deduce from what they say that the main issues in terms of integrating these new digital systems have to do mostly with the corporate culture and not so much with the technological part, right? So how we manage human capital, for instance, I think is much more relevant than how we manage technology. So I think technology comes second after the human aspect. Okay, thank you, Marco. And the last question from our WhatsApp number is, first of all, they all can say congratulations because it's a very interesting interview, very interesting talk, so thank you. And another very practical question concerns the project that you are currently managing in SUPSI at the university. They ask us, okay, I don't have a startup, but I would like to be part of this coaching and improve my skills. Can I participate? Well, if you were a SUPSI student, I would say yes, same as before. Unfortunately, if you're not, then I have to say no. So enroll in one of our courses is my answer. No, of course, I'm kidding. But I mean, no, I would, of course, we're going to try to make everything more transparent in the future because, as I say, this is something we've only just launched. And we'll try to communicate it better in the future. For now, it is, however, 100% internal. And definitely the events, however, that we will hold are going to be public. We also do some webinars, some podcasts, and we're going to do a community of students. And some of these things are going to be public. And definitely some of our activities will be open to the public. But the coaching part for now is only addressed at the students, yes, of SUPSI. But if you want to, you can contact me by email and we can definitely find some solution. Okay, we have a couple of more minutes. The last question is a trick question. Do you have a message for people who want to become entrepreneurs in the future? Yes, find a very good mentor. Do a lot of networking, show yourselves out there, be visible, go to online events like this one, for instance. You have so many. Listen to the people who speak, write to them, contact them. Don't be afraid to contact them on LinkedIn, wherever, to enter into contact, and look for a mentor because they will allow you to not make mistakes. And that is fundamental. So really work hard in what you're doing, but above all, look for good, valid mentors who can point you in the right direction, and they will really allow you to make that jump in quality. Okay, so I would say that with this, we could conclude. We started with a very negative message, and this, however, I think is a very good piece of advice. So trying to draw inspiration from a mentor or someone who has already done that activity, who already has an experience and can help you to avoid the same mistakes. And in any case, has the capacity of allowing you to do networking. Networking still remains one of the most important skills and capacity. So Marcos, thank you so much for all of these points and all of this food for thought, everything you've told us in this half hour. It has been extremely interesting. We will definitely follow you for your project in SUPSI. Thank you, Davide, and thank you to all the listeners. And I'm available. I'm online, so contact me. Have a great session. Bye-bye.
Well, we have dealt with issues connected to skills, competencies, to the creation of an enterprise. We have somehow hinted at the possible entrepreneurial qualities. Now we are deep diving into a different topic, which is again connected to skills. But probably everyone imagines this is one of the most important skills, the ability to innovate, to produce innovation, not only to create innovative products, but also to think in an innovative box. We are talking about that with Jacopo Perfetti. Good afternoon, Jacopo. Hi, everyone. Entrepreneur, the author of books, a professor at Bocconi University. Tell us about you, about your experience, about the contribution you can bring about today with your speech, and of course then a room for the questions. Thanks, Davide. Well, first, good afternoon, everyone. So I'll start from actually the last book I've written, Invent Your Own Work, which is this one, and that summarizes my own career. I'm an entrepreneur. I've always been an entrepreneur since I was 18 years of age, and being an entrepreneur means reinventing your work and yourself time after time. It also means to train and so on. I then got a university degree, an MBA, that also allowed me later to access different academias like Startup Bocconi, where I'm teaching, also Ca' Foscari University and Cattolica University. In my life, I've started enterprises that then I transferred or dismissed. I even tried to work on my own, so more as an advisor, following this fil rouge of entrepreneurship, because I'm a great supporter of that as a professional, and I'm also a lover of that because I love reading and studying entrepreneurship, understanding the very fascinating entrepreneur's mind. And actually, I ended up with that activity, as I said to Marco, which is teaching entrepreneurship. So let's start from here. Entrepreneurship can be taught. In your experience as a facilitator, as a teacher, as a professor, considering the aspects connected to innovation, how are they dealt with? Is it still important to talk about product innovation, or is this more an innovation in thought? Well, as in my experience, both practice and in theory, I believe innovation is mostly related to the mind. Often we talk about technological innovation, and this is a limit, not a mistake, but a limit, because we can have the most up-to-date, cutting-edge technology, but if we go on using that always in the same way, we will not produce innovation. If we have an innovative mind, if we can think innovatively, we can actually discover that universe, space, and time are relative, only using very simple tools like a compass. I, as a father, also try to teach this to my children, that is, this ability to think out of the box. Of course, that's much more difficult because teaching innovative technology is something mechanical, just like studying financial mathematics. It's very hard, very tough, very difficult subject, but it has logics that if you apply them methodically, you get results. It's different to train soft skills connected to mentality, particularly when your mentality is already well trained. And I'm thinking about people aged 35 or 40. That's more complex, but it's necessary. And when it's necessary, we find a way to do that. Well, here we are opening up to a larger topic related to what is usually called creativity or lateral thinking, or again, let's just think about a World Economic Forum and their report last year. They talked about creativity and ability to innovate as one of the main skills for the years to come. So innovation, innovative thinking, ability to innovate, how does this mirror into creativity? Is it only creativity or something else? Well, unfortunately, the term creativity has taken up an almost superficial meaning throughout the centuries. However, it is the essence of the human being, particularly, and this is quite modern, when the human being has actually to deal with artificial intelligence. I'm a great supporter of creativity applied to all contexts because I think, and here is the difficulty to teach not only entrepreneurship, but actually all subjects. We as human beings, whatever our profession, we are in front of a choice. Either we innovate our profession, our company, ourselves as people, or we will have to leave the market within short. So there's an urgent need to innovate, and innovation, if we consider that from the mental point of view, well, that translates into creativity. To use Einstein's word, this means solving problems without using the same logics that created the problems. So if we have the ambition to tackle and cope with a problem by trying to solve it using the same logics, the same people, dynamics, tools, and mentality that actually led to that very same problem, then the result cannot change. However, if we try to cope with that from a different point of view in a creative way, thus experimenting, we can solve the problem and actually open up to new opportunities that we could not see before. And that's one of the key characteristics of the entrepreneur in a broad sense, because I mean, entrepreneurial approach is something we all need, even though you are only an employee and you'll be an employee for all your life long. So you have opened up many fields for discussion, but I don't want to abandon creativity now because, as you said, the entrepreneur is also a collaborator, an employee, and must have an entrepreneurial thinking. Let's keep that aside for a second, but let's go on with creativity and lateral thinking. That's very questionably linked to innovation. If you had to choose the most important skills and features, well, if we had to talk about innovation as a major component in an entrepreneur, can the entrepreneur do without creativity? Can someone innovate for the entrepreneur, or can the entrepreneur be a facilitator for innovation, or should the entrepreneur have this innovative thinking? I think that if you are an entrepreneur in a classical sense, starting the own business, whether little or big, well, that person must have creativity in the DNA, because there cannot be an entrepreneur who's not an innovator. But let's make a distinction, almost a theoretical distinction, the difference between invention and innovation. The invention, the inventor, is quite often not a businessman, not an entrepreneur, because we've heard from Biro to Tesla, many inventors actually created new products that did not exist before, but they could not turn them into an enterprise, into a business. We then have instead many businessmen, entrepreneurs who could innovate something. If you invent something which was non-existent before. So what you do? The innovator instead innovates something that already existed before. So it's a question of how you do that. And most entrepreneurs are innovators. I mean, some have competencies and tenaciousness. They can simplify and streamline processes and products, marketing them and being successful because they act in a different way. So hitting new targets, new markets, and so on. So the entrepreneur is an innovator par excellence. Actually, the problem comes when the entrepreneur stops innovating for a number of reasons. And when does this happen? It happens in situations, which is the way I never suggest to use for starting. And so it is when the entrepreneur immediately transfers a part of the own business to an investor's fund in exchange for important cash. But in that moment, he is somehow denaturated from the own business, the own idea. So he loses the attachment to the own idea. Because at the beginning, we know you have hard work to tackle. But when the entrepreneur starts to be successful, loses sight of the market, focusing only on the business, so losing sight of the innovation drive that allowed the start in the business. And quite often that's the moment when the company starts losing ground. Or again, another case, which is specific for Italy, the generational exchange, because maybe the second generation is missing that innovation spark and business spark that characterized the first generation. somehow instead there are children and second generation entrepreneurs that actually are great businessmen, but they do lose that creative spark that they had at the beginning. Well, as you were saying now, quite often generational passage is also a confrontation between an attitude to introduce innovations in the second generation against the mentality of the founder of the business, which is not that in the liking of approaching change. Well, yes, for sure. There are also these cases. I mean, the interpreter stops being an entrepreneur in the very moment when he or she sees change not as something enthusiastic, but as something they have to fear. That's the end of the entrepreneur and of entrepreneurial mind. I am trained as an entrepreneur. I have an entrepreneurial approach to life. For me, whether that's professional field or personal life, I love change. And when you have this attitude, well, I mean, entrepreneurship should be taught since the very first year in the elementary school, because it's something that
complessa perché sei sempre in movimento, hai un'inquietudine dentro, come dicevamo anche.
Life more complex because you're always on the move. As Marco said before, there's a continuous mood roller coaster. It's really like a roller coaster. You go up and down, but on the other side, you're very enthusiastic. You are optimistic towards life and your work, which you can't do without. If we could actually convey this way of acting, of living, of tackling work, well, I believe life would change. I have a quotation of an entrepreneur. I don't remember his name, unfortunately. He used to say, when I'm going to die, I want to look behind my shoulders and say, wow, what a wonderful life I had, what a great adventure. So this is the life of an entrepreneur, a continuous adventure, and you don't know what's going to happen, but you know you'll do with that. So in short, the entrepreneur lives well in change. Yes, for sure. I have two questions that have come from the chat. You first talked about the ability in thinking in an innovative way, and quite often there's intuition in it, and not so many facts and evidence. However, my intuition is not enough for my investors. So how can I do that? They want proof of concept. Well, I give you a double answer. One, how I think of that, and second, how you have to behave with your investors. So what I think is, what is beautiful of being an entrepreneur today is that years and years of strategies have been put aside because currently experimenting is more valuable than forecasting. We can actually actualize cash flows for 10 years, make a strategic forecasts over the next 10 years, okay, but you need to experiment. And as we said before, think about MDT, startup, all these theories that can be taught, or you can read a startup book, and these strategies are very easy. But implementing experimentation processes, providing tangible results, you can make your decisions on. To demonstrate this and hence to bring something to your potential investors to support your theory, well, just think that Coca-Cola company, of course, which is definitely not a startup, replaced their chief marketing officer with a chief growth officer that is somehow in charge of experimentation within the company aimed at growth. Not by chance, if you recently saw Coca-Cola, they have only made one thing all over their history. Now we have 20 different variants of Coca-Cola, but in such a complex context to foresee, the only thing you can do is to go with experimentation on the market. This is what technology also allows you to do. This is what I think. But what I've always done with the investors, and by investors I mean whoever I have tried to sell my ideas to, also Feltrinelli publishers with whom I published my own book. I do not usually explain. I try to show. What does this mean? It means that when you go to an entrepreneur who wants some figures, of course, I hope I go forward, so not immediately, but with a minimum track record, so that maybe if I need an app to be funded or any other project, I hope to go there with a prototype, even very a real draft, but just to show that, because imaging the investors, but also advisors like me who have a look at 10, 20 business plans throughout 1 week, they cannot immediately understand what you are selling. So showing is important, showing. Like I have 3 customers, they are value 0, but they show you what I have in my mind, because it is very difficult to convey what you have in your mind, which is very clear in your mind, to the person who's in front of you, but who's not inside your mind, and who finds it difficult to understand. So the best way is to show. One more question again from the chat. I believe from Franco Confalonieri, a business plan university teacher and a professional. I believe that entrepreneurship can be taught only under some aspects and not as a whole. You are born entrepreneur. Developing and refining techniques come only on fertile ground. So this is important, but not the only thing. It is important to have credibility and innovative ideas. Do you agree? Well, not really. I have also interviewed for my book and for my passion. So I interviewed entrepreneurs who, till they were 40 or 50, they would have never thought they could be entrepreneurs. They had always been employed. Then what happened? A need came up. They were not feeling fine in their professional context. They were fired, any other reason, and they had to be entrepreneurs by force. And there they discovered to be talented for entrepreneurship. So my suggestion, my recommendation also to put yourself at test is just limit yourself. So you are in the need of becoming an entrepreneur. As for my story and all the stories I've heard or read about, if you are in this situation, if you must become an entrepreneur, you do that, you become that. Why? Because this is a question of survival. Hence, when you are put into the corner, a number of mental blocks you have disappear, just vanish away. This is the essence of humanity. Human beings have survived throughout millions of years, right, thanks to that. This is what I like to call the adaptability ratio, which is the real soft skill everyone must have nowadays, even more than the QI. What's this adaptability ratio? It's our ability to react to an event, turning it into an opportunity and reinventing ourselves as professionals or as people. So it is very tough to teach entrepreneurship. I do that in rooms, the MBA rooms, in front of managers who are aged 40, 45. So their mental form is well structured. So how do I do that? We do that in practice. We match theory with a simultaneous practice. In particularly, all people participating in my courses at Bocconi must have an entrepreneurial idea to develop. Because compared to other subjects, entrepreneurship, in my opinion, as we said before about showing, it is essential to perform that, to implement that. Only if you implement that, you can actually kick off tools, dynamics, and methodologies that you have learned in theory. So let's introduce a new element this adaptability ratio, adaptability index, a sort of a Darwinian ability to cope with difficulties and to draw benefits, to accept the challenge, learn from the opportunity, and however to exploit the opportunities that entrepreneurs see in the toughest periods. So is this something everyone has? I'm thinking about the last year, the year we are experiencing now. This is actually a moment of difficulty, a moment of crisis for many, let's say, human beings, not only entrepreneurs. But we've seen different reactions. Is there anything which is innate from that point of view? So this ability to adapt? Well, it's very easy to answer this question, actually. Just to have a look at children. I have 2 children. I see they have lots of friends, of course, so I see many more children, not only my children, and children have this talent. So this is something that we have innate. We then lose it, but that's a totally different question. Every single person reacts in a different way to events and crises. This is no doubt. I wouldn't say that everyone can become a super entrepreneur when given an urgency or a need. But the fact that we as human beings have survived even worse moments compared to these ones, the current ones, we as a species have this capacity to adapt. Then the term crisis is a term I usually think a lot about because as for my background and my attitude being so optimistic and so entrepreneurial, I always prefer to see them as opportunities, not so much as crises, because crisis is the negative version of opportunity, because it's like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It's a positive change. So why shouldn't we see that positive change always in all our situations? But that's the point. Every time mankind has lived through moments of difficulties, well, mankind has always been a winning party. So there can be, okay, a first time as everywhere, but since we have this ability, which is innate, in my opinion, to learn very quickly, and this is what actually allowed us to be who we are within our planet's ecosystem, I am pretty confident that we can learn and hence become better people after the more or less negative events we are experiencing. What is different, and this is probably the reason why sometimes we lose it, is the comfort zone where we often remain. So if I can think of enemy number one of innovation, well, there it is. Because we are innovative, because we have problems to solve. If we don't have any problems to solve, we are not innovative. And that's why I'm a supporter of crisis and problems, because problems originate ideas, problems allow us to be happy when we've solved them. A life without problems is extremely boring and definitely not innovative. So we should go and look for problems, because the more problems we have, the more solutions we will bring about, and we will actually end up with a final mental upgrade. Very interesting. We are almost at the end of our time together. Very unfortunate, because we could actually go on talking about these latest words you have just mentioned, but that would be too demanding. But okay, we, correct me if I'm wrong, but we are here profiling this entrepreneur shape a little bit better. The entrepreneur lives on change, lives on problems and challenges in the least romantic version of the term, of course, lives on problems, lives on the ability to solve problems. Sometimes even complex problems. This is something we have to adapt to what we said before. Is something missing? Well, yes, I'll conclude with this point. You know what the beauty of this period is? once we had an alternative, I mean, what shall I do now? I've got a university degree, so shall I go for the long road? So I'll sit at the desk and of course stay here until I turn 65 or 70 and then I'll retire and live the rest of my life in calmness? Or shall I become an entrepreneur? Well, now the traditional career is shorter and shorter, so why not? Why not being an entrepreneur? Because actually that instability and on one side and those certainties that let's say the more traditional career gave are lagging behind. So it's actually worth to do by oneself or to change continuously, because I myself have changed several jobs, but what I'm looking for is dynamism and flexibility, because I see that this is what the market is offering, whatever direction you decide to go for as a professional. Don't tell me, because when I started studying, my parents actually told me, yes, okay, go on and study and then you'll find a permanent job. Luckily, I've never been like that. So we have one more question, 4 minutes. Yes, one more question for the chat. Can you give us a practical suggestion? When you say showing the possible results, what do you suggest doing in these meetings that are always video calls, animated presentations, or are you using any special tools? Well, if I have to use a tool, I use a simple presentation. But if I've got a possibility, and 9 times out of 10 you have it, to have a small prototype to show so that the person on the other side of your camera can use that, much better. How to do that in practice? If you go on jacopoperfetti.com/tools, TOOLS, I have collected over 200 tools, and there's a real mock-up section where you find many tools. Many of them are free, that can help you realize prototypes of the idea you have in mind. One more reference, if you want, I've got a newsletter, which is again jacopoperfetti.com/newsletter. Every week, I provide suggestions on how to innovate yourself. I provide tools to do this activity, to perform this activity. Also because, okay, I can tell you something now, but in 1 month, the situation may be different. If we have a fil rouge connecting us, I can keep you posted. Very last question. Why becoming an entrepreneur? Well, that's the most beautiful job on earth. Well, without joking, being an entrepreneur, even inside a company, not only as a freelancer, as a professional. This is one of the few jobs that help you wake up in the morning thinking, okay, whatever is happening today, well, that's going to depend on me. Rarely you can find that in other contexts. And that's the reason why reason number 1, people leave larger companies, even like Google, is to open the own startup, because the emotion you get from your own startup cannot come from any other job. I believe, at least, because I've always been an entrepreneur. I've never worked in a company. But I don't think you have this type of engagement and involvement in other contexts in general, of course, because then there are different types of contexts. Thank you very much, Jacopo. Really, we've closed with this hint why being an entrepreneur, you can tackle crises, you can solve the problem, but what drives us then as entrepreneurs is passion and the will to define your own destiny. Thank you, Jacopo. Thanks, Davide. Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Right, so we can move on then to our next speaker. She is a woman, and we have now talked about a lot of aspects that have to do with the fact of being an entrepreneur. We looked at the skills, we have looked at how an entrepreneur acts in a moment of crisis, and now we need to deal with an aspect that is more connected to how an entrepreneur needs to communicate, or in any case, how the entrepreneur can or should move inside this digital world, which tells us substantially that communication, in fact, is very often fundamental to also show what the entrepreneur does. So we will talk about communication, we'll talk about digital communication, we will deal with some aspects that are dealt to are connected to how you govern media. And Francesca, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Francesca Casadei, welcome. Hey, hello, good afternoon, everyone. I know that you have a presentation for us, right? So I will, yes, give you the floor so you can share your screen. And definitely, I'm sure that you will give us a lot of food for thought, not just for our debate or for questions, but also in general for us to think about. And also for the people who are listening to us, I'm sure that this will be useful to, again, send questions to this WhatsApp number that you see on top of my head here on the screen. This being said, Francesca, you have the floor. Right. First of all, I would like to say congratulations to all of the students. I have to admit that I am actually signed up for Jacopo's newsletter, and I have to correct him because I think that the best job in the world is the strategist, not the entrepreneur. But no, I'm kidding. And of course, this is a job that I like very much. I have never been an entrepreneur myself. This is, in fact, my disclaimer immediately. But if you like, I can call Jacopo and we can have a brief debate about what is the best job in the world. No, I'm just thinking the strategist is, from the point of view of communication, is a privileged person in terms of the company, both inside the company, but above all, I would say also in terms of the evolution of thought and the behavior of human beings as such, because it's in between the business and also psychology, sociology. It is very interdisciplinary and it really allows us to never stop learning, never stop studying. So since that's very much my profile, I feel I'm very lucky to continue to test myself and question myself. Yes, well, I don't want to anticipate your presentation or anything because, but we've talked about this already. And there are, as I was saying, very interesting points in your presentation that really explain, as far as we can, of course, within this limited time, but explain some mechanisms also of the choices consumers make. And these are aspects that, of course, need to be considered by an entrepreneur when he or she proposes a product and a service. And in the last year, in fact, we have discovered even more how important communication is. And I really think that if I'm not mistaken, if I wasn't wrong, my introduction, that your presentation goes in that direction precisely, right? So as an entrepreneur, maybe you don't need to know how to govern them, but you need to know that they exist and, I mean, certain dynamics to do with communication and the media. So as you've said, you have an online experience as an entrepreneur, let's say, or rather you further entrepreneurs in their process of exploiting these opportunities. And sometimes also making that change, a shift in mentality to help them accept the tools that to some generations maybe weren't considered so important, right? Until 1 year ago, exactly, I would say, because now we have very painfully noticed how important they actually are, necessarily. Yes. Right, yes. So I would leave the floor to your presentation, and then when you're finished, I will connect again, and we will just have a short chat and answer the questions we're receiving from the audience, okay? Yes, thank you very much, Davide. Good. So as this title of my speech, of my talk here already says, I would like to talk about the media experience. And as Davide was saying just now, I am not an expert on entrepreneurship as such, because I have never myself founded or developed a company, but I do know a little bit, a little something about the world of communication. So I hope to give you some useful advice for the entrepreneurs of today and of tomorrow. Now, I would like to start from the concept of media experience. First of all, I would like to say I work in a media agency. I don't know if you all know what a media agency is, but to simplify, we could say that it's like the alter ego of a creative agency. So if in the past creative agencies would produce, for instance, commercials for television, media agencies are the ones that decide where those commercials are going to be broadcast and when. So what TV channels and what time slots and so on. So we have to say that until recently, until some years ago, and the people who actually have been in this line of business more than me, longer than me, are going to kill me, we didn't have a lot to decide because the TV channels were very limited, radio channels were very limited, and so on. Today, of course, we have an ocean of media, and this proliferation of media has created so many opportunities that are born and are developed every day. And many of these opportunities are, if you like, entrepreneurial initiatives, actually. So we could say that they are, an important challenge. The important challenge is that of creating this media experience. So that's a good thing, of course, because otherwise I would be out of work today. But the concept of media experience considers precisely this proliferation of media, first of all, the abundance of media, and secondly, it focuses our attention on the human perspective, on the human point of view. What I mean is that what I've noticed in recent years is that obviously the advent of this technological evolution has taken agencies to invest a lot on technology, on data, on platforms, which, and I don't want to be misunderstood, but they are, of course, fundamental and necessary to be able to, let's say, resolve or decide for a campaign in an effective and an efficient way. But I think what has gotten lost a little bit is the attention towards the point of view of people, again, the human perspective, because we have lost sight of the human behavior that underlies a certain kind of digital experience. From this point of view, I think we could say that there are some industries within which this is a very hot topic. So it has been hot for several years. For instance, here, coincidentally, I talk about Stephen Van Belleghem. It's a very difficult name to pronounce. I apologize, which is when digital becomes human, because he says in this work, in this book, that the results of a global market study shows that 73% of respondents actually stated that even when companies' digital channels work perfectly, they still want access to a real person. So even when they are perfectly automated, efficient, etc., they would still prefer talking to a real person, right? So 73% talking to another human being. And in fact, I'm not very surprised by that, nor do I think you are, because we're human beings. In the end, we don't want to sacrifice that, let's say, that's sensorial aspect, the sensorial side of human relations. So machines can only reach up to a certain point, but they can't replace human beings. And from this point of view, I also want to quote another book that I found extremely inspiring called The Four by Scott Galloway, where Galloway basically studies and analyzes the reasons for the success of four big companies, huge corporations in the digital world, which are, of course, Apple, Facebook, Google, and Amazon. And he also uses the expression the hidden DNA, which is not a coincidence. So if you like, the hidden DNA is a typical expression of human beings, right? It's DNA is something we have, but not machines. So when we think about these companies, we think about technology, we think about engineers, high tech, and so on. But in reality, the real reason for these companies' success has been their capacity of interpreting the needs and behavior of human beings. Let's think, for instance, of Amazon. And when we think of Amazon, we usually connote that or relate that to logistics, algorithms, and all that. But Amazon, in reality, was successful because it interpreted one of our instincts, a primordial instinct, which is that of hunting and accumulating things. And this is something that, of course, primitive human beings would do, but we still do it today. If we think about the first product that Amazon launched on the market, which was books, an easy prey, obviously, to catch and to digest. And then if we take a second example is Google. And I know that many of you are going to frown here because it's a bit like, Google is a little bit like a divinity, like a god. It responds to all of our questions. It answers any doubts that we have. And when more and more people say, as they do today, that they don't feel religious, they don't feel they belong to a religious community, and so on, then whom should we ask these questions to? We usually ask Google, and Google always has an answer. So it's a little bit as if it were our new divinity, our new religion. Then moving on to Facebook, we see that it gives us the opportunity of sharing information, and this interaction, of course, makes us happy. And when I think of Facebook, I can think of Maslow's pyramid, which I know that many of you probably are familiar with, and it studies the fundamental needs that human beings have to survive. Well, I think Facebook is positioned in the upper part of that pyramid, really, because it satisfies our needs of belonging, our needs of self-fulfillment and self-esteem, even Instagram, and even our, as I say, needs of self-fulfillment. So many have been able to exploit these platforms to, as I say, launch even entrepreneurial projects. And finally, last but not least, we have Apple. Apple, in fact, has always leveraged this idea of scarcity, product scarcity, extremely high quality, and luxury, if you like. So the many people today are asking themselves whether Apple is a technological company or a luxury company today. In fact, this is an open debate, if you like. But it is true that Apple allows us to experience luxurious experiences and situations and emotions. So when we have an experience of a luxury purchase, we are in fact experiencing an irrational experience. And this is something that goes on in the category of technology, which in reality doesn't have anything rational to it. I mean, if you buy a phone, that is actually a very rational act. I mean, you have to compare features, you have to compare, I don't know, different qualities of the cameras, whether it's frontal or 3 or 4 cameras, I don't know, there are so many different options. But I mean, they are, usually we go through these comparisons that go down to the smallest detail just to choose the perfect phone for your needs. And Apple, however, goes beyond all that with the iPhone, and it goes beyond all of this rational process, and it makes it irrational because it offers us a luxury experience, something different. So we could say, or what I like to stress and what I like to say also provocatively is that we always need to remember that we're still talking about human beings. And let's say people don't just click on banners. People are accessing information. They are showing curiosity towards certain contents. And people do not complete a video view, but they're looking at a content. So what does it mean? They're probably feeling some emotion, and they're also in this case trying to acquire more information about something when they do that. So this is the true behavior that underlies this completion of a video view. I mean, people don't just click on the purchase button, right? Because in that moment, people simply can't wait to wear that new pair of shoes or to hold in their hands this new phone or whatever it is they're buying. So we also need to think that when we are about to, let's say, work as an agency, and when we deal with campaigns, digital campaigns, we try to use, or in any case, always try to keep in the back of our mind the behavior and the emotions, the feelings that people are feeling in that particular moment. And this is something that definitely also helps us to create what I like to call the media experience. In fact, a media experience which actually talks about humanity and goes beyond the concept, which is maybe a bit passé, which is the media plan, which is typical tool of, let's say, the agency and the company, but not of people, because people are not an Excel sheet. People actually experience things and live experiences. But to get into detail more with this media experience, internally in my agency, the media experience, let's say, is composed by three elements mainly, in our view. We have, on the one hand, an element which is the connection. So this is the foundation of the media exposure, which means that it's about being able to reach a set of people with my media, with my communication, the right people, of course, which is my target of reference. Then this needs to happen with the right contents, just to jump to the end. So the right contents and formats, but it also needs to happen within the right contexts. So in contexts in which people also have the right mentality and are receptive to that kind of message. And as we will see, this can make all the difference in the world concerning the actual results of a campaign and the effectiveness of a media experience. So let's now look at the different challenges that underlie these three elements. Starting from the connection, if you like, also in this case, in fact, there are some sentences we often hear, which is if you've ever worked with a media agency, or if you've ever worked in a media agency, or talked to a media dealer, then I'm sure you've heard sentences like, the campaign has reached 80% of the target, or we reached 80% of reach. Okay, or my campaign delivered 1 million impressions. Okay, fine. These are all metrics, right? But the truth and the real question is, okay, but were we able to actually capture the attention of these people? And that seems banal, because, of course, you might say, yeah, of course. I mean, thanks. You're not really saying anything new. But this is something everybody knows. But the truth is that, of course, you're right in the sense that the concept of attention is different. It is something we even find in the etymology of the word advertising, because it's about addressing your attention towards something. This is something that comes from the dictionary. I did not make this up. It's the etymology of that word. So attracting someone's attention towards something. And I can tell you that this is a very, very difficult, hard challenge, because that many media agencies and communication agencies face today. It is extremely difficult. And also you can think of yourselves. I mean, how much attention do you pay to advertising in your personal life, even if you have tried to actively avoid it, because often it's actually a disturbing factor. I hope that at least we don't all stand in that situation, maybe, because advertising does do something positive, in my opinion at least. But let's say as an advertiser and as an advertising consultant, I still need to consider the impressive media coverage and exposure that people are subject to today. Very simply, we've tried to make the small statistics where we calculated the number of commercials per day that people are subjected to, or that they watch every day. And as you can see, there are quite a few. I mean, we can even see them divided by category here and by age group, as you can see in this graph. And the older age group, of course, since we they are more used to, of course, watching television and so on. They are more exposed to spots or commercials. But as you can see, the numbers are quite high. So let's say that this battle for attention is a live battle, and it's something that is still being fought. At least, I mean, in reality, we fight it for every single second of attention. Just think, and I'm showing you this image of Al Pacino here, and I don't know if you've all seen this this film. It's called Damn Sunday, where he is a coach, he's training this team, and in the end of the film, while he's talking to the team, he says that this team has to fight for every single inch, right? You have to fight, you have to die, and so on. And this is often one of those speeches that is used also by motivational speakers to talk about the meaning of the team and of teamwork. So we as agency and as communication experts, we really need to fight for every second of attention, of a viewer's attention, because every second can actually make the difference. So I'm showing you statistics here. It was published by IAS, and you can see that every single second incrementally can significantly improve the results of consideration and ad recall. So in fact, the fact of remembering the spot or the commercial that you've seen, that's what we're seeing here, how much you remember it or not. There's another professor called Karen Nelson, actually, who published this book called The Attention Economy. And this is another book that I have to say is very interesting indeed. And she shows us that even below a certain number of seconds, the viewer's attention is not really it's not visible or it's not manifested. So it's useless to our purposes at least. So there's a whole number of seconds where my attention is active and is actively watching a content, and that is connected to the number of days in which that communication can stay in my mind. And in fact, Karen Nelson in her book divides or classifies, let's say, attention into 3 types. And we have therefore active viewing, and that is a moment when the person is watching the frame, the video, for instance. Then we have passive viewing, when I am maybe sitting in front of the screen, but I'm not actually watching that content, I'm doing something else. And then the non-viewing. So maybe I get up, I go to the bathroom, or go out and smoke a cigarette or whatever. Or I don't know, turned my head to talk to my colleague or something else. And therefore the video is still running, but I'm not really watching it. So the interesting thing here is, of course, that this has a concrete impact also on the selection of media that we need to select today, and that we also assign a certain part of the budget to. So we have 3 examples. We have, as seen on TV, YouTube and Facebook, but you can, of course, do the same analysis for many other contexts. And we see that the results are quite different in terms of attention, depending on the media. So it's not surprising that television still attracts, let's say, the highest percentage of active viewing attention, higher than the other media we have analyzed here. But we also have to say that passive viewing is particularly high on TV. And also, passive viewing, for instance, has a weight inside this analysis. This is also something that Gianluca Diegoli says in his beautiful book, I have to say, Empty Your Chart, it's called in the translation, but this is the Italian title. And let's say the title is eloquent because I think he also says something like, you have all of my lack of attention. And he even quotes the effects of a peripheral vision, for instance, of television or of large screens in general. And he also weighs out the concept of lack of attention or disattention. And this research shows, it's a research he talks about of the University of Chicago from 2007, so it's a bit dated, but it's still insight about people, so it's insight that doesn't really get old so quickly, which says that people were subjected to the viewing of a commercial, an advertisement, and they developed that even if they found out that people, even if they didn't remember the spot, the exposure still created familiarity. So they became familiar with it. And this becoming familiar with that spot, with the commercial, made them appreciate the product. So if we are influenced by advertising, even if we do not remember the concrete commercial. So this is interesting because, as Gianluca says in the book, 2 minutes of lack of attention can be worth as much as 1 minute of active attention. So we have to be careful when we talk to an agency or a consultant. We have to try to listen to and understand if in everything that the person is saying, if he is actually placing the right attention on these metrics of attention. Now, there are several studies today that are being carried out, but also if you think about neuromarketing, for instance, where you can test before a commercial is broadcast, you can actually test the sensations and the attention that people place on that spot, on that commercial. We can even select the media based on the ones that can attract attention more than others. And within the media themselves, there are even attention metrics that can weigh, let's say, that we can weigh or calculate to make sure that our communication is actually effective. But moving on to the second pillar, let's say, or the second element, which was context, we can see how it is very important to enhance the value of the context that you broadcast or convey your communication in, because the contexts are not all the same. Let's just think about how we are experiencing the media exposure in this last year. But and let's just talk about the last days as an example. If you think, and I don't want to be too biased here, but even this lack of information or misinformation that some newspapers have created around this issue of the vaccines. We know that, of course, there are commercial logics behind that, so generating anxiety and making people panic towards the vaccine. Of course, that generates clicks and views, and that generates, again, in turn, investments. So obviously, this is important, especially for some newspapers and for some media. But we, as a brand, I mean, do we really want to appear inside these contexts? Do we really want to be part of these contexts? Well, I would say that the digital advent to do with advertising planning has created what I call the black box effect, where companies and entrepreneurs don't always know where their creativity ends up. And this is another book that I really suggest you read because it's very interesting, and they create this parallelism between the phenomenon of subprimes in the real estate industry and advertising in digital planning. And what they highlight, basically, as a big provocation is, do the people who publish ads really know what they are buying and where their communication ends up? And there is a statistics, in fact, that shows, I showed you this statistics, that show that people do actually consider the context within which they enjoy their contents and enjoy their communication, right? Or their advertisement in this case. So they do pay attention to the context. Francesca, can I just ask you a question? In fact, sorry, because you've said so many interesting things and I wrote down a couple of them. And but I just would like maybe to give a priority to the chat because I'm also receiving a lot of comments. And one is, don't you think that agencies keep producing more and more superficial and useless contents just to attract people's attention? Oh my God, okay. Well, I would like to give you an example more than answer that, but just maybe to justify my point, my position. What can I answer? I mean, I don't know. I think that the answer is somewhere in between. We've seen some campaigns that have been the object of insults, and I would say, luckily, today people have the possibility of expressing their opinion and saying what they think. Yes, also this idea of the use of influencers is very up to date, right? And very contemporary. So should we call that a strategy? I don't know. It's a strategy that thanks to what we used to call testimonials maybe in the past, this is something that can influence people's purchasing preferences or the choices of the consumers. And sometimes people have the perception, I think, that maybe there's something not so ethical about that. But maybe that's my personal consideration. I don't know. What do you think? Yes, I also read the more recent debate on Chiara Ferragni, where the fact that she supported her husband Fedez at the Festival of Sanremo, that one, you mean? Yeah, well, but I don't want to, express my opinion too much about that. It's true that this is part of our reality today, and I was, let's say, I think there's a legislation underneath there anyway that tries to regulate these initiatives. But, there's so much more to do on that issue and so much more work to be done. I think that people today are more and more capable of recognizing a sponsored content a sponsored content by an influencer, for instance, or a content that is not sponsored, whether it says the AD underneath or not. I mean, on the other hand, I also think that people like to have someone who gives them advice, right, and guides them. So I think that we as human beings, once again, always accept mental shortcuts. We like shortcuts. And so therefore, if I have an influencer that I like and that I identify with, and that person tells me that that lotion is really great, then I'm not going to analyze all the other lotions on the market, but I'm probably going to buy that one first and then see if I like it too. And then, of course, I know that that was probably sponsored, that the company gave that lotion to the influencer to talk about it. But I mean, I trust that person because I like the person, and maybe I want to be like that person. And there's also the mirroring effect that comes into play. Exactly. That's another topic that would take maybe another whole afternoon session to be discussed, because as you said, I mean, the choices we make as human beings are oftentimes much more complex or maybe even more simple than you could think, right? So there's a lot of, yes, without thinking too much about it. But anyway, I just wanted to summarize a little bit what you were saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you think it's important to consider the different dynamics, the things that come into play with communication, because as we have seen very often, let's say they are not used correctly. I mean, to sum up, it is not necessarily true that 100,000 likes on Facebook mean that people are really interested in your brand or that you've really captured their attention, right? Your brand or your idea or whatever it is. Yeah, you have to weigh these metrics, exactly. And in the end, the like is an action that I just click at the moment. But if in the past, that could be important, have an important weight. Today, that's not so important anymore. So recently, and I think precisely inside this book that I'm showing right now, it's been found that the first banner has a click-through rate of 44%, I believe. But then, I mean, in the past, that was a very important action from the point of view of the investor, of course. But the more we move on in time, the more time goes by, and the more these dynamics become a commodity, of course, they also lose more and more. They lose their weight. So you have to create alternatives. So, Francesca, our time is up now, and I would just love to thank you very much for your contribution. It has been so interesting. And I ask you to, yes, thank you. Stop sharing. Perfect. And thank you for everything you've told us, and have a great afternoon. If you can stay with us, we'd be very happy. And if not, then thank you so much for now. Thank you.
Ok, sono le 4.
Well, it's 4 o'clock. It's now time to leave the floor to our next speaker. We have talked so far about many aspects related to being an entrepreneur. We are now deep diving into, I believe, several topics that are connected to the methods, some winning formulas to be entrepreneurs, and we'll do that with Alessandro Rimassa. Good afternoon, Alessandro. Good afternoon, Davide. Good afternoon, everyone. If we were in presence, I would like actually to give me your signature on my book, because Generazione 1000 euro is, well, okay. Generazione 1000 euro dates back to many years ago. The first edition online dates back to 2005, and the first physical edition dates back to over 15 years ago, 2007. So I feel old now. Well, okay. Don't tell me. Okay, short introduction, of course, because I was reading from your bio. You are an expert in digital transformation. You founded Changes, the first Italian community devoted to professional transformation and growth. You have directed the IED Innovation Center. You are co-founder of the Talent Garden Innovation School, I see many more things, among which also the one I've already mentioned, your activity as a book writer. I would like to start with a very easy question. Can we call you a serial entrepreneur or not? Well, apart from any definitions, considering all these things that have characterized your life, which one is the one you love the most? Well, actually, I don't like the term serial entrepreneur because I've created my own business from scratch. It has worked pretty well. Today, I'm experimenting to actually create a new business. I believe that in my life, maybe I could go with a couple, but what I love now is to help other people who want to become entrepreneurs, data investors, helping many startups grow and develop more easily. I must say that I strongly believe in the theory of the seasons in life. In each season, I enjoy doing something different. The most important thing I've done so far is the Talent Garden Innovation School for sure, because from scratch, we have built the most important school in terms of innovation in Italy. It has been developed in many other countries abroad in Europe. And so Talent Garden has become a real hub for innovation many talk about and use. So that's probably my most important enterprise. Then other enterprises are my books. I've written 7 every time. It's like delivering birth. And as for fun, well, with changes in another project I'm going for in this moment, I'm really passionate with that. But if I consider what mostly satisfies me and makes me happier every day is choosing and training people. Because when I consider my professional successes, I discovered that they are not the result of my special capabilities, apart from one, which is a major one, that is choosing the right people, training them and helping them grow day after day for them to be able to do something great. Today I'm doing this with the new 2 projects I'm launching. I did that last year with Feltrinelli, debuting in the education field. I'm doing that with the 9 startups I'm investing in, and I talk to their founders and entrepreneurs day after day, so I try to help them grow. I believe this is something that I thought would have come later in my life, but actually I've discovered this is the key to my successes. It's not me, it's my ability to choose and train the people, and this is extraordinary, I believe, because when you see the people that maybe start as juniors, they have started as interns in a company, and within short, they make the difference in the business. That's great, absolutely. Okay, let's say you've come here in the right moment with the right timing. So you'll help us somehow summarize our own journey throughout this entrepreneurship journey. We are trying to profile the entrepreneur in its different characteristics. We've talked about competencies, skills, methods. We've described the entrepreneur as someone who lives well in moments of crisis, who devotes to solving problems, a passionate professional. From your point of view, so from the point of view of a person who has done business, who's helping businesses and startups, characterize what an entrepreneur must be or must be. Well, the entrepreneur must be a person who can provide concreteness to a project, an idea, a thought, turning it into reality. The entrepreneur is the person who builds a business, an enterprise that will resist to the entrepreneur himself or herself. The entrepreneur is not the owner of the business. The entrepreneur is the person who shapes the idea, changing it into a reality that will generate money, that will generate profits, and hence that will create value. In my opinion, the entrepreneur, and I'm saying this here from Milan, in the heart of the place that gave birth to many entrepreneurs. Well, I don't think this is my the absolute view, but my view of an entrepreneur is to create something which will resist to yourself. This is a self-analysis I've done on myself, because up to 39, I was a manager. I was not an entrepreneur. When in 2015, I was 39 and I decided to become an entrepreneur, well, apart from cutting on my salary, investing money and risking whatever I had. And in the end, I was only anguished for the future of my own loved ones, because sometimes I woke up in the night saying, okay, well, I have recruited this and that, and what about if we're not doing well? So I feared for the people I cared for. When I started with the Talent Garden Innovation School, I said, okay, my horizon was about 10 years to develop it throughout Europe. And then I said, I'll become the honorary chair. So I had the idea that at a certain point, that thing would be transferred to someone else. As a matter of fact, that was quicker. It took me only 5 years instead of 10. For that business to resist me, so to survive me. So I selected and recruited and trained the people who could go on with the project. That project that had turned into a business, maybe pursuing it in a different way compared to what I would do. But I think I'm a good person at building from scratch. So I tried to select the people who, better than I could do, could maintain and develop that business in time. This was the great challenge for me as an entrepreneur. That is the challenge of creating a business that survives the own founder. I don't like entrepreneurs who talk about generational passage as if business were like a legacy. The business is of the person who builds it and brings it forth. It's like a child. Adopting parents are not less parents than those who biologically have a child. They are parents anyway, because they are those who grow that child. The same is for the business. The business is of one founder first, then of the other owner, and then of another one. This is a very different conception compared to what our fathers actually had. There are actually businesses that are identified within the founder's name. One thing, Davide, and this is a suggestion to everyone doing business. Of course, you also exploit the founder's name, personal brand, and history to create the business. And when we started with the Talent Garden Innovation School, I used my own image, my own personal brand, my credibility to create that brand. And we did the same also with Davide Dattoli, who had founded the Talent Garden. So at Talent Garden Innovation School, it was he and I together, our two faces, skills and abilities to build something new. But actually then we started a depersonalization moment. This is something all entrepreneurs should do. So at a certain point, the business brand must be more important than the entrepreneur's brand, also because that entrepreneur with his or her own credibility and abilities can do something else. And so it's nice to have more than one child in life. Clear? Well, I believe this is a very important concept. I would like to ask you one more question as regards your own experience. We are this afternoon trying to look for some success models. So you are following startups, you are investing in startups. So in the first person, you'll be interested in checking whether the startup you are personally investing in has a model that works or not. When you analyze these realities, these businesses you are investing in. So your interest is very high in somehow checking this startup. What do you consider? Is there a model you go for? So when you see that, you say, okay, that's going to be a success. Well, this project instead is not going to work. So are you going for anything like a fixed model? Well, no, I never have all these certainties. I must be honest. The working of a business, the success of a business is given by several factors. First, the people who actually lead the business and the people surrounding the business leaders. Then also the corporate culture, the operating system that leads and drives the business, the market where you are a player, and also the timing, because there are some right moments to penetrate the market and other moments that instead are not the correct ones. A discrete amount of fortune, I believe we always need that, and it's quite valuable for what you are doing. And also the ability to listen to the people, to the market, to the clients, customers, the competitors, to try and improve your own product. Because when you launch a startup, you're launching a product, you are starting from a first product which might potentially evolve and develop also in number, in time. But what I really look at, so I strongly relate to that, where the people, of course, I consider the business plans, the figures, I try to understand the market, but I take that for granted somehow. If you decide to go for a company hiring sailing boats in the center of Milan, in downtown Milan, that's probably not going to work out. So that's the first type of analysis I do. But after that, the real core is to understand who are the people inside the business, what their corporate culture is, and what is their view for their own business. So I try to understand whether they have clear ideas, whether they have understood what they are doing, if they are creating a business to turn it into a real success, and not only because they want to live it within only a few years. How much are they in love with what they are doing, and how ready are they to work every single day, hour by hour, not even day by day, on what they are building. This is a very human assessment. Clearly, you start from the figures, from the numbers, and you consider that, but that's default. If you don't have appropriate numbers, that's done. You are done. But then there's the human factor, sharing the goals and the will to attain them. I believe that if we consider the sports world, we have great sportsmen who were not very talented, but thanks to their training, abnegation, determination, and so on, they became successful. I believe that this is exactly the same with the business. So can we summarize for the people who are following us? Probably, well, definitely for Alessandro, if they wanted to ask Alessandro, why aren't you investing in our startup? Well, one of the core points is the human being. So I assess the human being, and I assess how much that human being believes in the own child, as you said before. This is even more important compared to all other assessments that you take for granted as regards the figures and the business plan. Well, for sure, yes, there it is. I have always interpreted my job from that point of view, even when I selected and hired people to work with me. And in these years, considering Talent Garden and other projects I have followed, I have exceeded, I think, 250, 260 people that I hired in the past 6 or 7 years. If I need a digital marketing expert with the basic skills for digital marketing, well, that's taken for granted. I assess that, but digital marketing skills is ground zero to start selection process. But when you hire a person, the most important thing is to wonder, okay, but if tomorrow evening we work late, do I want to go and have something to eat maybe at midnight with this person, or shall we go together and have a beer together after that longer hours? If the answer is yes, that's the right person. If the answer is no, well, that's done. In the same way, I do assess also the companies I want to invest in and the entrepreneurs I point to. Now, I currently have 9 startups where I'm investing with my investment holdings, and they are 9 entrepreneurs and CEOs I actually talk to almost every single day. Since then, we always have our phone call either from 7 to 8 in the morning or from 10 to 11 in the night. Well, these are people you have something strong in common with, or that's done. Okay. Is this your own way to assess people, to assess companies considering the people, or is this something more widespread in the market, in the world in general? Well, for sure in Italy, but in general in Europe, I would say I can tell you that this is something quite common. I've seen that also a lot in Northern Europe, in Spain, Austria. I must say that in Europe, that is something very common, considering that startups and entrepreneurs, well, they are real a lot nowadays. So the people who invest, those who do not only put the money and then forget about that, but those who also invest time to have those businesses grow, well, they choose the people. In general, if we consider the first stage startups, that's true also for all ventures and incubators like the ones in the US. They always believe in the team before then they believe in the figures and in the idea. So I believe this is a core point. And today, also considering and building up the idea of making business from now to 2030, which resembles to the title of this nice event, that's the challenge for me. We must build businesses that produce products that can help the people live better and better experiences. Not so much product, not so much service, but more and more experience. If you want to build an extraordinary experience for someone, you must be the one who wants first to live and experience extraordinary experiences in first person. So I believe that the human factor is central now. If 2010, the first decade of this century, was the first just the beginning of this new century, and that was based on something different. The second decade are the years of corporate culture, of the people, of businesses who can quickly move, starting from their own people, and that by developing the own people, develop the own business too. So they do business as a consequence of the people they choose, they train, and they grow. Well, within the afternoon, we have picked several aspects. So I want your opinion, even though you partially expressed that many aspects talk and describe the entrepreneur as the one able to relate, manage the people. The entrepreneur is the one who can network, who can be empathic. We've talked about emotional intelligence. Clearly, you have now added additional concepts that are more linked to values. I believe that a startup that has among its values something which is connected to the 2030 agenda and talks about sustainability and inclusivity, maybe that has a higher value compared to a business that maybe talks about more watered values, more connected to figures, I mean. So business is more connected to man and to the humans and sustainability. It's a more human business, isn't it? Well, yes, I believe that both the extraordinary character of the digital revolution, the digital, which we have always considered as something that detached one from the other, actually the digital experience allows us personalization and building of experiences that are no more mass-like. When you do that, there are businesses. This means that there are businesses behind that point and bet on the people and not so much on the standardization of the own resources. In a future of work and in the world that changes, where everything that is repetitive is automated with algorithms before and with artificial intelligence nowadays, well, at that point, evidently people become important. Maybe there are fewer within the businesses, but they are more important because they are those that lead the machines while performing their own duties. So the human dimension is the core dimension to me. And if we consider that in general, all businesses are part of the history of the bigger businesses. They are founded and led by great men and women, and they do whatever they do thanks to great men and women. So technology automates a part of this and provides the possibility for an utmost expression of talent. So this is the great challenge, in my opinion, and it's really very beautiful because I believe that companies originate to make profit, to make business. That's their goal. But you can do business, you can create profit by developing people and not only considering people as something which is not necessary and not core. Before leaving you with the question I've asked everyone, so giving a suggestion to entrepreneurs, I wanted to ask you a question that we have received from the chat. We have about 5 minutes, so we can have both. Well, question from the chat. The metaphor of the athlete connected to the entrepreneur is very interesting, but agonism is not for everyone. In the moment when the successful startup understands that he is not designed for agonism, does that mean that he must leave? Well, if he is not devoted to agonism, he's not going to be successful. Well, a specification, a startupper or entrepreneur are not two different things. They are the same thing. The startupper is just the beginning of the creation of a building. So the entrepreneur, the successful entrepreneur, the one who can build something that works, is a person who's devoted to agonism, to competition in all its forms, from going beyond, raising the bar of expectations, abnegation, ability to train, the ability to select the people to surround him or her to provide the best result. So I believe that it is quite simple. Well, doing business, being entrepreneurs is not for everyone, and there's nothing wrong in not being able to be an entrepreneur. Some years ago, when I was talking with different American people, it clearly emerged that they were looking for bankrupt startuppers to bring them in bigger companies. Why? Because if you are an entrepreneur, you have different capabilities. You must know about product, business, marketing, finance, and so on and so forth. So there are entrepreneurs who were not successful because maybe they were excellent in developing the product, but they were really chaotic when dealing with the financials. So the headhunters, those headhunters were looking for them to bring them into larger companies, because there's the entrepreneur, which is a profile quite common in larger companies, because they take up responsibility and make things happen. That can be an evolution. When you make business, you must never be scared. Well, we have no time, because otherwise I would ask you, have you ever been scared? And if so, what? But we are reeling up with our time. However, I would like to ask you one more question. A few people are following us. We have a goal today, which is to profile the entrepreneur towards 2030. What's your suggestion to the people who want to become entrepreneurs? They have to enjoy it, because it's going to be hard. They will have to commit a lot. They will have to sacrifice even more things. So every single second you do your business, you must enjoy that. You must enjoy what you are doing. I am a person who's always enjoyed my job, and when I stopped enjoying, I changed. So if you want to do good business, you must enjoy that every single day, every single hour. You'll have tough times, but if in our day enjoyment has prevailed, this means that independently on the final result, that is going to be an experience that was worth living. Then, if you are successful, good. If otherwise, we have learned something that we can use later on in our own professional life. Thank you very much, Alessandro. Thank you with your final message to entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs. Thank you. Thank you for your contribution for this half an hour we spent together. And I'll see you maybe on that occasion. I'll ask you to sign your own book. Thank you. Thank you very much, and enjoy the afternoon. Thank you. Hi, thank you.
Right, so we have almost reached the last speaker of this first part of the afternoon session. In fact, after this, we will have a second part that will be moderated by from 3 p.m. and onwards by Carlo Giardinetti, and then from 5 p.m. I think he meant by Carlo Giardinetti, and then as our last guest we have Andrea Lamesa. And with Andrea, I would actually like to talk about many topics, of course, but among all the topics, I would like to talk to him in these 30 minutes about a topic that we haven't talked about yet specifically, which is this issue of the risk. Because obviously, Andrea, in your life, you have taken on quite a few risks. One in particular, one important risk, which was that you left a certain job, a certain profession to follow a dream. And in fact, in this case, we are really truly talking about an entrepreneur of yourself. So the person who really shapes and forges his own destiny and pursues a dream. So I hope this was a correct introduction. Andrea, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, we do. Okay, so yes, thank you, first of all, for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be able to share my story in this context. I just wanted to start with a short introduction, if I may. Yes, in fact, we talked to each other, of course, before this meeting, but I know that you are usually in San Francisco, but you're not today, so I'm very happy. No, well, actually, I moved here. I moved back to Lugano. So this is my home now and no longer San Francisco. Okay, good. So you're in Lugano, and we're very happy about that. But let's hear a little bit about your history, actually, which is very interesting, and about the choices you made. in your profession? Yes, let's say that my career was not exactly straightforward or linear because I didn't exactly know what I wanted. So I kind of made several attempts to try out several things. One thing I knew was that I had a high passion for technology. I've always had one since I was a teenager, since I got my first computer, and I was fascinated by that and by entrepreneurship. So these two constants, but the rest was unknown. And then I started, let's say, almost a classic career, which is studying economics and trade. In university, I thought that was a safe way to go. But then after 2 years in my first job, I noticed that I wanted to do something of my own, since I also had a passion for entrepreneurship. So I left that safe road, let's say, for the unsafe road. But I kind of acted by instinct. But the first thing, of course, that I found was an immediate failure, almost immediate, because we're talking about 2005. Facebook was not yet in Europe. And I thought that since I was seeing what Facebook was doing in America, I thought I could create a social network to allow people to get connected online, which is, of course, something we do, all of us today, and we do it every day. It was a bit naive because Facebook became global after 6 months, and obviously it cannibalized my smaller activity. But from this failure, I noticed that I accessed this new world of social media and web marketing, and I created a social media marketing agency, as it would be called today. This was in Italy. And that did have success, actually, immediately, because I was one and a half years ahead of my time, actually, in the market. And after 2 years, I found myself in a stage where I was still not really satisfied with what I was doing, although I had the permits, the invoices, and let's say the income and the clients, as Alessandro was saying. But I was noticing that I was actually getting further and further away from my true passion, which was creating a product. I had just created a company of services for a certain need. But again, I decided to give that up and to take on another risk. And I decided to just abandon everything. So technically, I made my suitcase. I left for San Francisco without a visa, without anything. I won a scholarship simply to get there, of course, with a student visa. And then with my second entrepreneurial idea, which was really to combine technology and my passion for products, which was a recruiting software. And that did work. So I finally found clients, and I had a big response from the market immediately. And I was even able to sell the startup and be acquired after less than 2 years, actually. And I found myself in America at that point with the opportunity of choosing what my next chapter could be. And I was pushed a bit by this curiosity of learning things that other startups had done in Silicon Valley. And I decided to, again, take on another risk and join a startup company that was very small and unknown and was just at the beginning, called Airbnb. And I was one of the first employees in this only office they had in San Francisco. And that was, I spent another 7 years with them. So it was the beginning of a long career. Then I had various managerial roles in the States and in Europe. I also contributed to taking Airbnb to Europe, and I became the general manager of Airbnb in North America. And then I worked, and this is also linked up to entrepreneurial activities. I actually created an entrepreneurial initiative inside Airbnb, inside the company. And this is what Alessandro was talking about before. Also, what it means to be an entrepreneur is not only being an entrepreneur outside or so for yourself, but it also is something you can do inside the company. So it's more a mentality. It's more the desire to change the world through a product. So I was lucky enough to actually go through these other 2 years inside Airbnb and working on this new product. And then I took a break, reflection break, let's say, because I decided to, I thought that to really decide how to continue my life, I needed to really detach myself entirely. I took 1 year off completely. And then I came here to Switzerland because I want to build my new path. So for a second, I think what I have learned, if I look back on my experiences, I have to say that entrepreneurship needs to be defined differently. It's more a way of doing things, not so much a profession per se. And taking on risks sometimes pays off, but sometimes doesn't pay off. In my experience, it's always better to take on risks because if you always discover something about yourself. To me, my path as an entrepreneur was something about discovering myself and what I really love to do more than an opportunity. And then another thing was that I've always moved from one opportunity to the next. I've always navigated at sight, never asking myself where I want to be 10 years from now and working backwards, but jumping from one opportunity to the next. And this, I think, is something fundamental of the second part of my career. Yes. Well, let's start from a concept that, as you mentioned, Alessandro already anticipated in his talk, which was the fact of being an entrepreneur. I mean, we started this afternoon at 2:30 talking about or trying to outline the professional profile of the entrepreneur. In the common imagination, the entrepreneur is a person who creates something, governs a company, manages some process. And this is usually it's a brand, of course. But at the end of this first afternoon session, I would say that now we have reached a different perspective. Alessandro mentioned it already, but you are now confirming it, that even an independent collaborator, let's say even someone inside a corporation, inside a company, also he or she himself or herself needs to be an entrepreneur inside the company. So there's no longer a separate identity of an entrepreneur, but there's actually a shared culture of entrepreneurship that can be shared by people who are even working in a company. Yes, I perfectly agree. In fact, in my experience, the entrepreneur is someone who cannot stand that that problem has not been solved, and therefore he gets obsessed by solving it. So this is something you can even apply inside a company, of course. Yes, so inside a company, at this point, I would say that it's even important to take on responsibilities. In fact, I could wear the hat of the entrepreneur, even if I'm not actually an entrepreneur, but I'm just responsible for a product line or for a certain function. I could wear the hat of the entrepreneur and take on the responsibility of, for instance, dealing with a problem, as you say, solving this problem or responding to positive or negative results. Is that correct? Yeah, in fact, the sense of responsibility is not given by the person, but it's not given to a person, sorry, but the person needs to take it, right? So the person wakes up in the morning and considers that it's his or her task to solve some specific problem. And you start to behave as if that was really your responsibility. In my personal experience, when I was working in companies, is that companies with an entrepreneurial culture actually give value to this kind of behavior. And then in the end, they end up also giving you this responsibility formally, assigning you this responsibility. But I agree perfectly with what you're saying. So if we talk about this aspect of risk, on the other hand, you just talked about several stages of your life where you took a risk, where you left something certain or safe to embrace something unsafe or uncertain. What is it exactly that made you choose uncertainty over certainty? Well, in my personal case, I have to say that it was easier than it seems when I talk about it, because in reality, once you realize that that road is a dead road for you, it's a dead end, it's very easy to change your road, right? You're pushed in from inside, let's say by your intuition. So I had reached an awareness that I wanted more, that I couldn't get more on that road, and therefore I jumped without having anything to lose, so to speak, of course, because obviously I had something to lose, but I knew in any case that I wanted more. So I was always lucky, I guess, that I felt that I didn't really have a choice. I couldn't continue down that road because if you face the risk and you think that that is really a big risk for you, then it will paralyze you. But it was never paralyzing to me. Yes, and another thing you said before that was interesting is that up to a point you chose and decided without having a clear goal in your mind. Is that right? And then you said, okay, but now in the second half of my career, if I'm not mistaken, I set a goal for myself and then I moved backwards. Yes, okay, correct. In fact, I was trying to say that it's not that I didn't have a goal, but I didn't have long-term goals. I wasn't thinking ahead in time, like 10 years ahead or whatever. I was just thinking 1 year ahead. So I was thinking, what am I good at and what do I like to do? And I tried to put those two things together. And of course, what opportunities are in front of me. And I tried to make these three things coincide. And then another component was, what kind of change do I want to see in the world 10 years from now? And what path do I need to prepare for myself to get there? That's what I meant by looking back or starting from the end, let's say, from the goal and moving backwards. So let's call them long-term goals as opposed to short-term goals. Okay, there's another thing that we haven't talked about yet this afternoon, but I would like to have your opinion on this and comment on it with you, which is the approach on or the reaction to mistakes. So you've all talked about risks, you've all talked about taking on risks and accepting challenges, solving issues, and overcoming obstacles, but we haven't talked about the relationship with the mistake yet. I'm sure it's happened to you, like it happens to all of us, that you've made mistakes in the past. I think mistakes are probably a fundamental part of our growth as individuals and as professionals. So it's important to learn from mistakes. What is your thought, your consideration, your relationship to mistakes? Well, first of all, I would say mistakes happen, and luckily they do, because the mistake is the other side of learning something very fast. I fight a bit with my personality here because I cannot stand making mistakes. This is a really, really bad attitude if you're an entrepreneur, by the way. An entrepreneur needs to jump and make mistakes, has to make mistakes. But from my point of view, I had to fight with my instinct a bit because I had to tell myself that the mistake is the name I give to my learning process. And other people had confirmed to me that that works and that I've made many big mistakes in my past. So I think you really need to accept it as part of the path, part of the development you go through. So when you make a mistake, you need to, of course, be aware of that, but also you need to have the lightness to look beyond and not, worry too much about it. Yeah, well, what is it exactly that made you change your mind? Because you said you changed your considerations about mistakes or the way you think of mistakes. Do you think it's important to make that click for every entrepreneur? Yes, absolutely. The entrepreneur, by definition, needs to try out new things. So it's like science. I mean, science proceeds by trial and error, right? You try and you make a mistake. So the entrepreneur needs to do the same thing, apply the same method. And the mistake is part of the method. And that's something I hadn't understood in the beginning. When I did realize it, I noticed that that was simply a way of operating. So if you ask me why I changed, it's because it's the only way I could move faster. Otherwise, you're paralyzed because you want to move slower so you don't make mistakes, to avoid making mistakes. Good. And another question is, what qualities do you think helped you to make choices and to substantially reach the point where you are today, which is definitely going to be another point of departure for you to move on? Well, on the one hand, I think it's curiosity, because when I think the great thing about changing your direction professionally, changing your road, is that the new road has different components from the previous one. So this little light bulb of curiosity would turn on, and that would be my driver to move on. So one driver is curiosity, and the other thing is what Alessandro was saying, people, because I am someone who has a lot of energy, and I get a lot of energy from working with others. And I think that the pillars of entrepreneurship and of startups are people. They're not a patent or a product or whatever, but they're the people behind the startup. And that's a benefit for me because I get energy from people and I give energy. And the third one is what we've just said. I learned to just take the jump. I have taken on increasingly bigger responsibilities, and I'm always a bit bigger than my skills. And that little gap between my skills and the responsibility has been my growth. And if I knew that I didn't have the necessary skills, that is what pushed me to get them, to obtain them. Okay, this evening we're going to, in fact, talk more about mistakes and about how you can deal with mistakes in general. And we're going to have our so-called F-up night. And do you know, in the European culture, in the Italian culture, what do you think that the culture concerning mistakes is like? Also on the other side of the ocean in the United States, I think there is a distinction in how we conceive mistakes. If you agree, what do you think that is? Well, certainly I would say that in the culture of Silicon Valley, for instance, or in the American tech world, there is an absolute tolerance of mistakes. and an absolute social acknowledgement for anyone who gives it a try, whoever tries and fails. So while I was coming from a culture in Italy, on the other hand, where on the one hand, you celebrate the genius and the inventor and so on, and whoever makes it, but socially speaking, there is still a lot of stigma about people who make a mistake or fail and don't make it, like the entrepreneur who fails. So I think the American culture in that sense opens the road towards more people who really are willing to try out new things. And they tolerate mistakes more. And then there's another economic issue that this awareness, cultural awareness, is based on, that the American job market is much more tolerant of someone who fails and exits the job market and then comes back. It's easier to come back, right, to being reintegrated in the job market. That's maybe not a cultural element, but it's one of the pillars that this culture is founded on. We still have a few minutes, and just like I did with the other speakers before you, I would like to ask you for a piece of advice for our audience, for the people who are listening to us, and also I've asked the same thing to the other speakers. What advice would you give to someone who is asking themselves, am I really an entrepreneur or not? What should I do in the future? And what can I do to become an entrepreneur? Should I risk? Shouldn't I risk? Whom should I be to be a good entrepreneur? Well, I would say that I would shift the attention maybe from whether to be an entrepreneur or not. I would ask myself, what change do I want to see in the world, and what do I like to do? What product do I want to contribute to society, or what problem do I want to solve? And once you have gotten the answer to that, I mean, and if the answer is, now I really have to give it a try myself, then you're certainly an entrepreneur. So I would maybe focus more on what motivates you, because entrepreneurship is a long and hard road to go down. And more than that, yes, more than asking myself what product and so on I can launch in the market, I would ask myself what I really want to contribute. Yes, and another aspect that emerged with Alessandro also was this value, this acceptance of the value in being an entrepreneur or doing business, the idea that we detach ourselves a bit from the idea that of the business being there to generate profit. So shifting from that to, as Alessandra was saying also before, doing business because by means of my business I can convey certain values, which definitely will also generate a profit because obviously it's still a business, but mainly is focused on adding value and conveying certain values. So it's more described as a choice of values and a choice of a life choice. And also, as Alessandro said, for instance, a startup is like having a baby, right? And if there is a concept that is connected to my value, when you need to suffer, then when you need to really work hard 24 hours a day for however many days, you're going to suffer less because you know that there's a value in there and that you are trying to fulfill that value. Is that correct? Yes, I agree. I think that profit to me is just an accounting artifice. I mean, a profit is just one of those elements that you need to survive, but that's not the main core of the company. I think that the company and the business is a projection of a personality of the founder onto a product or a service. Therefore, the values are embedded in that product or service, right? So I agree with what you're saying. And in fact, the best startups have very, very strong corporate cultures. If I show you, I don't know, a photograph of that office, you can tell me what product that company has made, because the culture of that company is so famous that you immediately associate it to their product. So yes, I absolutely agree. Okay, and in a perspective of the future entrepreneur, so for instance, 2030, as we have in our title, do you also agree with this vision of, yes, I am not really the business, but I do something that we could call a value proposition or that satisfies some kind of a need, and then I also need to make sure that that reality can survive by itself. This is a different concept compared to the past, right? Compared to some years ago. Yes. Sorry, can you repeat the question? Because I'm not sure. No, we're talking with Alessandro about this fact that the entrepreneur doesn't, of course, marry this company for his whole life, I mean, but the entrepreneur creates something that can also be a separate entity and can survive beyond him, even if he leaves, right? So there's no longer this concept that the entrepreneur needs to be married to the company and go on until the end of the company. No, I agree with that as well, because I think the type of entrepreneurs I admire, for instance, are the ones that conceive the company as being having an indeterminate life. I mean, because you don't conceive the company just for, I don't know, 10 years or whatever, but you create a culture, something that can continue even for hundreds of years and really leave a mark on society, really leave a trace. Right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for your contribution and for adding further food for thought onto our plate, onto our afternoon of dialogue that we have talked about the entrepreneur and about entrepreneurship. So thank you very much. Have a great afternoon and a great evening. And I hope you can stay with us for the Fuck Up Night tonight. Thank you very much. Right, so we have reached the end of this first half of our afternoon session, and we have had a lot of different inspiration, a lot of different points for reflection that have been put on the table by all of our speakers. And this journey has really taken us to underline the profession, the figure of the entrepreneur, who maybe is something more, something different compared to what we usually imagine in our common imagination, as we usually see entrepreneurs, let's say, in society. Because the entrepreneur is a professional who really pursues his own values, his own principles, and who adds something to the company, something very personal and something that is part of his own identity, that really person who cultivates relationships, emotional intelligence, who works with skills that are connected to the more human part of this profession, and a person who really gives an added value to these relationships, both when he, for instance, founds a startup company like Marco Dall'Agro already explained to us in the first speech, in the first talk this afternoon. So both when you generate and create a startup where you have a team of people who work together, but even more when the company, when the business develops its potential, also in that case, the team and the relationships and the people become fundamental. So we have finished, as I just said, the first part of our afternoon session. And in 5 minutes, actually, we will give the floor and open up the second part of the afternoon session. So I will leave the floor to Carlo Giardinetti, who will be moderating the second half of the session. I don't know if he's already with us online, maybe not. So let's say that, yes, oh yes, there he is. Hi, Carlo. Hello, Davide. Good afternoon, everyone. Did you hear everything we've said? I think it's been very interesting, the first part of the session, with very stimulating points, right? Yes, doubtlessly. I agree, absolutely. And so many friends, so many familiar faces. I'm happy to see so many colleagues that I was extremely happy to listen to all of you. I found it extremely inspiring in a context like today, where we're talking about entrepreneurship. And also I liked to explore, let's say, the meaning of the word entrepreneur more in a broader sense. And I am not myself a huge fan of saying, I don't know, startups and all of these, this funnel that we're so used to now, because I think that the entrepreneur has a much more stimulating mission, a broader mission with different angles. And all of the guests today have explained this very interestingly. So we have listened to many different aspects. Yes, it's been a great afternoon. I'm going to leave you now to continue listening and discussing and moderating. So have a great afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Allora, proseguiremo in lingua inglese da qui. Quindi...
Okay, we are going on in English from now on. So if you want avail of the translation, the Zoom platform allows you to use it. You have the little world with the interpretation below on the bar below. Well, to comply with timing and people who might want to join us, so you know that we are starting at 5. I'll actually use these few minutes to start off in an easier way. Maybe in English. I see Ellen on the other side of the video, so I will switch to English, and I hope everything works fine. So you can use the translation available, the simultaneous translation, if my English is terrible.
Ellen, I'm going to switch to English now, and like I said, there will be the opportunity for anybody who want to hear the translation in Italian to use the interpretation down. To make sure that we respect timing and perhaps people that are planning to join in at 5 p.m. Sharp, we have 2 minutes to just make sure we warm up, we enter into the conversation. I see the name in the tag is Pim, whom I know very well, but I see on screen Ellen. And Ellen, maybe you, oh, there's also Pim. Okay. Hi, Pim, great to see you. I can't hear you, Ellen, for some reason. So this is good. We have 1 minute still. We can look at the audio. I still can't hear you, no. So we still have a minute to go. I think, try again. For a second, I could hear the microphone.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Wonderful.
Okay, well, great that we have that extra minute to check that then.
Absolutely.
So great. So let's just wait a few more seconds before we get going. So we have the nice 5 o'clock start. Maybe people are still grabbing something to drink.
Exactly. A coffee or whatever suits better at this time of the day. Ellen, you guys are connecting from today?
The Netherlands.
Okay, so that's home for you.
Home for us, yeah. So is it okay for me to get going?
I will get us started with a small introduction, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's 5 p.m. I think we can start. Welcome everybody to the second part of the event. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm Carlo Giardinetti. Wear a couple of hats myself in terms of working hats. I work as the Dean of Executive Education at the Franklin University, Switzerland, but I also work as a sustainability lead and leadership senior advisor at Deloitte Consulting. Today, I have the pleasure, really, first of having followed the session until now, and now to facilitate this session where we will talk about corporate rebels. So a small introduction to that. 2 guys that I deeply respect and follow eagerly in their venture, Jost and Pim, 4 years ago. They gave up a promising corporate career and became the corporate rebels. They decided to embrace a mission and purpose to make work more fun. They created a bucket list and they talked and visited over 100 pioneer working places around the world. And what they've learned and what they have been able to share with a growing global community today has been recognized by global media, such as including the New York Times, Forbes, Huffington Post, The Guardian, and the BBC. But also by international awards such as the Thinkers 50, and by pioneer networks such as the Lugano Living Lab today, here. So I'm really happy and excited to have Pim and Ellen with us today. I and Pim actually go back, I think, to 2018. And I have since followed eagerly all the progresses, and I've also included some of my of their work in my Future of Work course at Franklin University, Switzerland, but also in my collaborative leadership, as Pete knows, that I teach at the Harvard University. So I hope many of you will follow the Corporate Rebels cult blog from today. In case you're not doing so yet, I'm sure you will feel intrigued to follow it after this session. Meanwhile, also welcome to Jean Menges. Hi, Jean. We will connect with you in some time after the presentation by Pim. So Pim, and Ellen, over to you for an exciting presentation, and I will jump in again in around 20 minutes for some Q&A. Meanwhile, I will put my video off so that you get the full stage for you. Okay?
Great. Okay, thank you. Thanks for the very kind introduction, and also a special thanks for us being able to do it in English, because for myself, apart from ciao and gracias, I would say that is my Italian. So I'm happy we can do it in English. So before we get going, a few points to make. If you have any questions, please let us know, because as soon as Pim starts to share his story and questions come in, I'll just stop him on the point to get your questions in. And there's also going to be time for that after Pim's presentation. So before he goes off and shares what he's learned together with Joost over the last 5 years, I'd like to get a bit more of a feeling of the group we have in front of us. So what I'll be doing is I'm going to share a poll with 3 questions and questions you should be able to answer very quickly with a yes or a no to get a feel of what the group is in front of us. So I will launch the poll now. And I'd like to ask you to answer these 3 questions. So first of all, I feel engaged at work, true or false? Secondly, I have access to all company finances. And third, I get to set my own salary. Okay, so the votes are coming in very quickly. Let's see. So I'm happy to say that feeling engaged at work, we've got a lot of people answering true. Shame to see that some people also have to answer false. So good to see that the first point is an overall majority is true, but after that it's already getting a bit less. So having access to all company finances, for the most of the people that is not the case. And I get to set my salary. More people saying false, but actually quite a big group saying true. So it'd be very interesting to hear what your backgrounds are and how it comes you're able to do that. So, okay, great. Thanks for answering this question. And without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Pim for the next 20 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. Good to see these results, actually, because it's quite surprising to me that so many people are engaged at work, and also quite a big group of people, indeed, as Ellen mentioned, have the feeling they can set their own salary. That's going to be interesting. We are going to share in the next 20 minutes a very brief overview of the things that we've seen around the world while visiting all kinds of pioneering organizations. But before we're going to do that, a little bit of background on Corporate Rebels. So for the ones who are not familiar with what we do, a bit of an understanding of why we are actually doing the work that we do. So as Carlo already mentioned, we quit our jobs about 5 years ago, our corporate jobs in which we were doing the thing that we were trained for, but we didn't really enjoy the work environment. The problem was that there were too many rules, not a lot of freedom, there wasn't any meaning or purpose to what we were doing, and there was the fact that there was always a boss around or a manager around who told you how you should be doing your job. So there wasn't any freedom, any entrepreneurship whatsoever. And for us, this was very frustrating. And after 3 years of working in those corporate environments, we decided to quit. And we set out to solve the problem that we experienced ourselves, but that unfortunately many more people are experiencing at the moment, which is a feeling of not being happy, not being motivated in their work. So the first thing we did was we started to look at the problem in more detail. So we went through lots of studies being done on the topic, research that has been done already for decades on the current state actually of today's workplaces. So let's take a look at how broken today's way of working actually is. First of all, if you look at the levels of engagement in today's organizations, you see that 15% of the world's population is engaged at work. So just 15% of the people feel truly passionate about their work and their work environment. This is, by the way, a big research study done by Gallup, where they ask hundreds of thousands of respondents around the world a couple of simple questions to figure out whether they are engaged, disengaged, or actively disengaged. So if you look at the disengaged group, there's 67% of the people feeling disengaged at work. So they come into the office, they do what they're being told, but they're not truly passionate about the work that they're doing. So that's a shame for those people, but also for the organizations that they're working in. Even worse, 18% of the people are actively disengaged. So they are in the office, or maybe sometimes they are not, because they dislike their work environment to such an extent that they, for example, call in sick while they are not. Or they don't do the work they should be doing and therefore sabotage the work of others in the organization, simply because they don't like their work and their work environment. So it's a painful statistics where you see that more people are actively disengaged and being counterproductive to the organization and their colleagues, and only 15% of the people being engaged at work. Some more stats. So if you look at the symptoms of burnout that people experience in today's workplaces, we see that there's 23% of the people, so of the entire workforce, that always or often experience symptoms of burnout. For example, headache because of too much stress in their work, not being able to work, being at home, not being able to do any of the things they should be doing because they are burned out. There's 44% of the people that sometimes experience those burnout symptoms, and just 1/3 who never experience any of those symptoms. So we're not just disengaging people in the workplace, but we're also literally making people sick. But it gets even worse. If you look at meaning or purpose at work, a lot of people, 40% actually, according to this study, feels that their job makes no useful contribution to society. So they feel that they spend their time either pushing paper around or at least not contributing to something meaningful to society. So to summarize, we have workplaces that disengage people, and we have workplaces that make people sick. And the work that people are doing doesn't feel meaningful to 40% of the people. So in our perspective, the way we work is broken, and we need to do something about it to create organizations where people actually love to be, where they love to contribute, have a lot of autonomy in how they're doing their work, and also feel meaningful when they go back home at the end of the day. And this is very much from a personal perspective. We argue that if you spend 40 hours a week in a job, it should also be a job that you thoroughly enjoy. But if you would look at this from an organizational perspective, and if you care more about the bottom line than about, for example, the happiness of employees, even then it's interesting to focus on creating a workplace where people love to contribute. And it makes a lot of sense, of course. So if you look at some of those statistics, you see that productivity and profit are higher when people are more engaged at work. At the same time, absenteeism, accidents, and defects are lower when people are more engaged at work. So this is pretty common sense. If you like to do something, the outcomes will probably be better too. And there's a strong link, strong correlation between those two elements. So it makes sense from a personal perspective, but also from a business perspective, to create a workplace where people truly love to work. So this was the idea that we built Corporate Rebels around. As I mentioned, we came from different backgrounds. Joost being a nanotechnologist, myself being an industrial engineer. So we had no clue how to make work more fun. But it is the problem that we wanted to solve. So we decided to look for the best organizations, the most advanced pioneers around the world that could teach us something about making work more fun. 5 years ago, we created an overview of all those pioneers. from academics to CEOs to entrepreneurs to internal rebels inside organizations to companies that are doing things differently that have been able to make their workplace more fun, more engaging, more motivating. And we set out to visit them. Over the past 5 years, we've been all around the world to learn from these pioneers and to share everything we learn through our blog, our book, in sessions like these, to make people aware that work can be quite different than what most people are currently experiencing in the workplace. So what I'd like to do is to go through the main trends that we've seen. So what distinguishes these organizations, these progressive organizations, from the more traditional companies that most of us know. And it's summarized in 8 trends. It's not a fixed model, but it's a source of inspiration to understand what these pioneers are doing differently than the more traditional workplaces. So let's start with the first. On the left-hand side, the top left, you see the focus of more traditional organizations. And on the right-hand side, you see the focus of more progressive organizations. The first one is a move from profit to purpose and values. So in those 100+ organizations that we've been visiting, there's a very strong focus on contributing to something meaningful, having a clear purpose, with a clear set of values in place that guide the decision-making in the organization. So people that are working there, customers that are buying their products or services, or suppliers that are supporting these organizations, all focus on creating and achieving and pursuing this purpose of the organization. Of course, making money is vitally important for any organization in order to stay alive, in order to make new investments. But for these companies, that's not the reason they exist. They exist for something more meaningful than just making money for shareholders and for just maximizing the profit every single quarter. Second trend is a move from hierarchical pyramids to a network of teams. And with that, I mean the traditional organizational structure with the CEO on top, then lots of middle management layers in between, and then at the bottom line, the people that are doing most of the operational work. These organizations don't believe that's the best way to organize it. It might have been a good idea 100 years ago when everything was the same every single day. But nowadays, when things change so quickly, when organizations constantly have to adapt to changing customer needs, they feel that a network of team structure is much more applicable to them. Meaning that you have lots of small teams that act as if they are separate businesses that are working together to achieve something they could not achieve alone. So mostly 10 to 15 people together in a team, multidisciplinary teams, who are responsible for their own profits, who are responsible for their own investments, their own strategy, their own hiring and firing. So a lot of decision-making power is transferred from the top of an organization to those frontline teams. The third trend is a move from directive leadership to supportive leadership. So from bosses who tell people what to do and how to do their job, that have to make all of the important decisions themselves, towards an environment where you have coaches or coordinators or whatever you would like to call them, people who are supporting their teams as good as they can, not by making decisions for them, but by facilitating whatever is needed for the teams to achieve success. The fourth trend is from plan and predict to experiment and adapt. So moving away from the idea that you can predict what's going to happen in the next year or the next 5 years, and instead focusing on the short term, setting up experiments to test new products, new services, or new ways of working. And then based on what you learn from those experiments, adjust your course. To give you some example, for example, there's a large Swedish bank called Handelsbanken. They employ 14,000 people and they don't have an annual budgeting cycle. They believe that it's not a good idea to waste a lot of time coming up with detailed budgets and detailed plans on what might be happening the year after, to then the next year get stuck in these budgets because there's no freedom anymore to move, for example, money around in the organization. So instead, they have a different process in place that's much more dynamic and allows them to change much quicker than other organizations. And for example, the past year, in times of crises, when things constantly change very quickly, a company like Handelsbanken is much more successful than its traditional counterparts because they are able to change more quickly based on their changing work environment. The fifth trend is from rules and control to freedom and trust. So how can you get rid of all of those rules and policies that dictate how people should be doing their work? So getting rid of fixed travel policies, rules that tell people how they should dress, rules that tell people when they should come to the office and when they can go home. But also more advanced rules that are being let go of, for example, in terms of approvals that are needed in order to make decisions within the organization. So all kinds of things that are being done to give people more freedom, more trust, so they can actually act like responsible adults. So these organizations believe that you don't need rules and control mechanisms in place to make people feel at home, to make people successful. And instead you should trust them and give them the opportunity to behave like the proper adults that they are. The sixth trend is from centralized authority to distributed authority. So from not just having decision making in the top of the organization, but instead pushing it down as far to the front line as possible. It is important, if you want an organization to change quickly, to listen to its customers very quickly, that you also have decision making as far to the front line as possible. So the ones that are in contact with customers and suppliers are also the ones that can make decisions quickly. What is needed for that is a lot of transparency. People need to be able to assess all of the information so they can make the best possible decision. So we talk about a trend called radical transparency, where organizations open up their company financials, the performance of teams, individuals, and the entire organization. But also, for example, opening up salary levels so everyone can see who earns what in order to create as much transparency and create more trust through this transparency than in organizations where they prefer this more secret approach where only information is available in certain parts of the organization. The eighth one is a move from job descriptions to talents and mastery, where you get away from the idea that you have a fixed job description that neatly states a person's day-to-day activities. And instead, these organizations believe that you have to give people the opportunity to find their main talents and to craft a job or to build a job around those main talents. That's vitally important if you want to engage and motivate people, but it's also important if you want to leverage all of the talents in your organization. And then giving people the opportunity to constantly develop those. So let me quickly give an example of an organization that is quite strong on these 8 trends that will help you to make these trends come to life. So if you look at a very purpose-driven organization that has a network of team structure with not a lot of middle management in place, in fact, no middle management whatsoever. If you look at supportive leadership, freedom and trust, one of the prime examples is an organization called Buurtzorg. It's a Dutch healthcare organization employing 15,000 people. And among those 15,000 people, there's not a single manager in the entire organization. So you have 2 directors at the top of the organization. They're not the ones making decisions for those other 15,000, but they facilitate a work environment where those teams, where those individuals can do their work in the best possible way. So it's a fully self-managing organization. More than 1,000 teams of 10 to 12 people who take care within their own neighborhoods of the hiring, firing, onboarding, recruitment, planning, execution of their work. So within this healthcare organization, you see a lot of these trends very clearly. The beauty of it is that their costs are 2/3 lower than the traditional healthcare organizations in the Netherlands. So their overhead costs are 67% lower. Employee engagement is way higher at this organization. Client satisfaction is a lot higher in this organization. Productivity in this organization is a lot higher. So you see that it's not just beneficial in terms of engagement, but also in terms of business outcomes and doing the work more successfully. So that's just one example of an organization doing that. On our blog, you can find many, many more of these pioneering organizations that are redefining what work looks like. And I think it's interesting to mention that a lot of these companies are not the usual suspects It's not the companies from Silicon Valley that we all love to look up to. But these organizations that you've probably never heard of, that have been able to organize their work in radically different ways. And we believe their stories need to get out there so more people can see that work doesn't have to be this frustrating, terrible experience that many people unfortunately today experience. So that was an introduction into our main trends, the things that we've learned over the past couple of years. Now let's go over to some of the questions that you have on the topics that I've just talked about. So back over to you, Carlo.
Tim, how refreshing and how interesting. I completely agree with you that a lot of those stories are a little bit hidden around the world, and the job that you have done with the corporate rebels are going out and surface those stories and make them available for the global communities is really precious. And what I can confirm as well is that actually there's a lot of large and, let's say, better known companies that they might certainly not be able to tick all the boxes, but they are indeed trying in one way or another, because they either have corporate rebels inside, planted as a Troy horses. We could use also that metaphor, and that they're trying to move some levers, and of course sometimes it's not so simple. But today we also have an audience of entrepreneurs, and which might explain the level of engagement with the poll, with the initial poll, because as entrepreneurs and future entrepreneurs, they feel perhaps more engaged. And my question would be, there is this idea that at the startup level, at the beginning, there's a lot of fun, that you can work 20 hours and not feeling it because all the power and the energy is there. However, in the next phase, when it goes to scale up and grow, the fun seems to be going away almost as a natural evolution. What's your experience with that, and any advice that you could share?
Yeah, interesting question. There's this phenomenon that is often being talked about in this field, and it's kind of called the startup scale-up fuck-up, where you organize yourself in a very successful way at the beginning. As you mentioned, there's a lot of passion, a lot of motivation to get things started and get things up and running and make their impact on the world. Then during the scale-up phase, it's maybe still a little bit there, but you can already feel some of the more traditional processes coming into place. You maybe have venture capitalists that are joining the organization, or other investors joining the organizations that might have a very clear view on how they would like to organize the company. So the problem, I think, is in this phase, that in the scale-up phase, is that you lose a lot of those initial ways of working. You lose a lot of that excitement as the company grows, as the company needs to become more so-called professional. And we tend to come up with a lot of more corporate, more traditional practices, because many people think that's the only way to organize work on a large scale. And then if they come after this scale-up phase, they enter the fuck-up phase, where they kind of lose everything that they had. They become just any other organization where there's not this passion, where there's not this freedom, etc., to focus on all of these things. So I think what is vitally important is to rethink the way you would like to work already in a very early stage of an organization. When you're still small, it's way easier to change things. And I think it's also vitally important, if you want to continue the success of an organization for a very long period of time, not just financial success, but also success in terms of motivation and engagement. You need to make very deliberate design decisions at the very beginning. For example, like the company I just mentioned, Buurtzorg, they, in the beginning, already decided that they didn't want to scale the organization with a traditional hierarchy. First of all, it would be way too slow. Secondly, then if they would have so much bureaucracy, they wouldn't be efficient and successful anymore in delivering good work. So they said already in the beginning, we are going to organize with self-managing teams of 10 to 12 people who will be running their team as if it's a separate business, and they're fully responsible for it. So if they're successful, they are the ones that also feel this success. If they are unsuccessful, they are actually the ones that also have to suffer the consequences. And they might actually lose their job if they're unsuccessful for a long period of time. So they already have the ownership as part of their design in the organization. And they've been able to grow within 6-7 years from just 4 people to 15,000 people. So you see that it's possible to scale very rapidly and to still keep that fun, that engagement, that motivation in the organization, even if you scale the organization to such an extent. But it's about making those deliberate design decisions at the very start. Because if you want to make them, if you have 250 or maybe 1,000 employees, it's going to be way harder to change the organization than when you design it already up front from the beginning.
And that would become also, in many ways, a different pitch that startups need to learn to present to their investors, because very often the investors are then looking at the next phase on, how are you going to organize, how are you going to structure, how are you going to control your growth. And I think there is a need for developing new type of pitches for investor that says, I'm going to scale up while I keep the fun and the good that I have today. And maybe that's an area where in the future you can help as well in all the different entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and there are some investment companies that are already popping up that are doing things differently and that focus also not just on the product and the service, but also much more on the way of working. And they believe that if you remain a purpose-driven organization, if you don't lose that, if you organize in less hierarchical ways, that the organizations that they invest in will also in the end be more successful. So I think there's a strong incentive also for people, for investors to do things differently. But I think we have to increase awareness first before more people actually start working like this.
That's great. And I'm conscious of time, but I want to try a brief 30 seconds from you. Characteristics of the Ticino, this region, and also the north of Italy, is that we have a lot of family businesses. So entrepreneurs that are not necessarily going through the what we just call now the startup and scale up, but became entrepreneurs. And family business are very well known for being able to care of their people very well, because they have a different attitude in that sense. I'm not so sure though about the fun part in family business. Sometimes it is there, sometimes I don't know many stories. Have you come across of family businesses, anything that you can share in that space?
Yeah, so we have seen quite a lot of family businesses also being organized progressively. The good thing about family businesses is they have complete control over their organization, that they can actually, if they make a decision to organize more progressively, they can actually make the organization do it. And with, for example, corporates, it's harder because there's a lot of shareholders that want to have a decision-making power in this as well. So for family businesses, there's an opportunity to do this. And I agree with you that they tend to take care of people better, at least, than corporate organizations. But I think also in terms of how they're structuring their work, there's still a lot to be improved. Where also in traditional, or also in family businesses, there's quite a traditional approach to work often, where sometimes it's even going in the direction where the leaders of an organization feel as if they are the kind of parents of the people in the organization, and instead of giving them the freedom and trust to make their own decisions, they kind of start acting in a more parental way, which I think in the end is not that good. If you really want to create an environment built around the autonomy of people. So I think there's different things, different aspects into play. That come into play, and I think there's an opportunity to do things very differently in these family businesses, and I think more organizations should be grasping those opportunities, not just to be better than their competitors, but also to engage their people and make their work more fun.
Excellent, and it makes a lot of sense to me, especially since the new generation of family business. Now, family business are handed over from generation to generation. Sometimes in that passage, in that transition, there is an opportunity also to maybe redesign some of the elements. So I would like now to invite Professor Jean Mengis to come on stage and with the video. Professor Jean Mengis is Professor of Organizational Communication at USI. And thanks for joining in for some further reflections. And I know you have also questions that you bring from your master students. So over to you, Jen.
Thank you very much, Carlo, and warm welcome to everyone also from my side. It's a great pleasure to be here. And also thanks to Pim for the very inspiring talk. When the Living Lab came to me and said, you know, if I wanted to do this, and I heard that you're going to be the keynote tonight, I was really excited, and I thought it would be a great opportunity not just to come by myself, but also bring along my students, who unfortunately you cannot see at the moment. But in the spirit of participation and flat hierarchies, I thought I'm not going to just do my panel by myself, but they prepare some questions for you as well. So for technological reasons, I was told they cannot ask the questions themselves, but I will be their spokesperson. I hope you don't mind me doing that. So I was really, you know, inspired by this courage that you had of leaving your professional jobs and going on to look for inspirational leaders and, you know, about your project in general. So congratulations to that. And I guess my role today is also to be a little bit of a challenger and, you know, maybe create some debates and maybe question some ideas that you have in a spirit of an exchange of ideas. So the first thing that struck me is, on the one side, you're saying that your 8 kind of trends that you just presented to us are not a fixed model, and they're not some silver bullet line that we should follow one by one, but and you also show quite nicely how they work in very different contexts. But the question that kind of came to my mind was, are there situations when, you know, freedom is problematic? Or are there situations when supportive leadership is problematic? Or are there situations when we want to have clear rules rather than just being driven by purpose and values? So my first question to you would be, where would you set the boundaries of your points, of your principles? And maybe reflect a little bit on, can there also be negative repercussions of these approach that you're suggesting? The context of this is a little bit, I mean, many of the things that I've seen on your list was, you know, as you also mentioned, is what we're knowing from Silicon Valley. And in recent years, there has also been quite a critical debate on, you know, how Silicon Valley actually, you know, I was thinking, for example, I remember the first time I went to the Googleplex in California, I was struck that no one actually used, for example, their swimming pools and all their kind of fun activities, but people were busy working. So in many ways, you know, how much is this also a rhetoric that is conducive to certain notions of productivity without you knowing? And so shall we just take over these new ways of working as the new standard, or how critical should we be relative to this? So what are the boundaries of these principles?
Well, I think what is important to understand is that for why we say it's that every organization should find their own way. Mm-hmm. I think what is important to understand is that there is not a single solution that works in every sector, every culture, every specific organization, and also not, and I think this is more important, not every of these 8 trends works perfectly well for every single individual. And there might be some people that prefer to have an environment where they're being told what to do and where they have less freedom. What we've seen in our research is that about 15 to 20% of the people leave an organization in a transformation like this. And the reasons they leave is because they say, we don't want to work in a liberated environment. We want to keep, for example, our position in the hierarchy with our decision-making power, or we just want to be told what to do. And it's 15 to 20% of the people. Unfortunately, the way we organize work is traditional in about 95 or even more % of the cases. So I think there's a disbalance between those people that want a traditional work environment, or at least that say they want a traditional work environment, and the amount of traditional work environments around. I think the balance is completely wrong. If we would have 80 to 85% of the companies organized very progressively, and just 15 to 20% of them traditionally, I think that would make much more sense. Then people can more easily decide where they would like to work and what kind of environment they'd like to work. And I think that it is important for any organization to keep in mind the perspective of their people. And if they work in the financial sector or in healthcare or in government or in an IT company, they might have different challenges that they have to face than people working in a different organization. And I think it all starts with having a conversation. What is it that frustrates you in your current work and in your current organization? And how can you get rid of that frustration? What are ways of working that we can maybe learn from other pioneers to adopt in our own organization to see if we can change and make work better for the people working in our organization? And it's about listening to employees, setting up experiments to change, and then finding your way towards your own ideal way of working. And for us as a company, that might be very different than when you would look at a, for example, healthcare organization or a government organization. I think it's important to share that. I think it's important for people to understand it's about having that conversation with employees to understand how to make work better. And then look at these 8 trends as a source of inspiration to see how you can actually make a change and what you can learn from others that have already gone before you.
So for example, one of my students was asking, there are people who just want to do their tasks and be told what to do. So that you would say that is a small percentage of the organization, and for them maybe it would be right to have a certain set of rules without taking over responsibilities, without having a pressure to be innovators and entrepreneurs, but to be able to do a more kind of 9-to-5 job if they wish to do that.
Yeah, well, it depends. I think also organizations could argue for the fact that they don't want to be a workplace like that they want to be progressive, have an environment where people have autonomy, are trusted, and can make decisions themselves. And that if people don't want to be part of that kind of new type of environment, that they are advised to leave the organization. Or you could have a differentiation within an organization, but I don't think that will hold on for lots of years. I think you will get some frustration in the organization by doing that. And I think this is also where it's important to underline the one trend that I talked about is the trend on a network of team structure. We split up a bigger organization into smaller entities. And within those entities, there might be differences in culture, where you have one that might be a bit more traditional than another. And people can more easily move between these different teams or entities, depending on what their preferences are for a work environment. And I think this is also important. We should also have a diversity in this and not force everybody to work exactly according to these 8 trends, simply because we say so. I think it's much more important to give people the opportunity to find their own ideal situation, ideal working situation.
So thank you. Another kind of question I have was, you went to all these pioneers, you went to people that you had in your bucket list as inspiring leaders, but now you're working as a consultant, I imagine, also in organizations which are less progressive or which are on the ways there. So the question is around how you make change happen. How do you go from, let's say, we are all socialized in this traditional ways of doing work, either in our current organization or in previous work experience, and we have to get into the habit of kind of doing things differently. But we also know routines have their importance. We have we talk about organizational inertia. We have organizational cultures which ground organization in certain ways of doing, which might not always be ideal. So how do you go about transforming an organization, let's say a more traditional organization, in a more progressive organization, which might be a little different than starting off as pioneers and having this kind of entrepreneurial drive from the start?
Yeah, I think what is important, like you see, there's a number of different approaches. Some are more top-down, others are more bottom-up. And we always differentiate between kind of three different ways of doing that. So you have the bottom-up approach, where one team or maybe one department in the organization decides to start doing things differently. And they can make a change, but they cannot make a radical change, as in they can't change the entire organizational structure of that company because they simply don't have the power to do so. So they start making changes in their own part of the organization, changing the things they can influence. And then if they are successful, many others in the organization will jump on board. And you kind of create a more social movement within the organization.
Like an attractor.
Yeah. And that works in some organizations, that works really well, especially if you don't have a mandate from the top. But if you have a traditional organization where somebody at the top of the organization wants to create change, then there's also an opportunity to do that. Some organizations decide to do it with maybe 1 or 2 years preparation, and then bringing the organization into this new state almost overnight. Mm-hmm. So it's very risky. Mostly you see performance drop for a while and only then go back up. A more or a less risky and more safe approach would be to, even if you have mandate at the top, start in one specific part of the organization. Give them the freedom to experiment with new ways of working, maybe change the structure, get rid of the bureaucracy in that part of the organization, and give them the freedom to do things in a new way. And if you figure out what works, then translate it to other departments in the organization and bring them along on that change. So it always focuses quite a lot on finding the pioneers in an organization, setting up experiments, because beforehand nobody knows what's going to work. So you better test and try and learn. And then bring more people into that new way of working as you see what is successful in your specific work environment.
Did you face kind of resistances, rebels against rebels?
Yeah, all the time. So to clarify, we're not really consultants. So what we do is we learn from all of these organizations and share it, and not really kind of go through that whole transformation process ourselves. We believe organizations are much more successful when they do it themselves. So without that external support, they just need the ideas to get started. So, but there's always, in all of these transformations that we're researching, that we're following, you see always also a counter movement, as I think in any change among people, that you have maybe a couple of people that are super excited and that others might not want to jump on board, or maybe even sabotage or work against what those pioneers are doing. And I think that's really where the rebellious spirit comes into play, where you need to keep pushing, keep challenging, and keep trying new things to make sure that you still get where you want to be, and measure the things that you're doing and if they are successful or not, because that helps you a lot in convincing other people to jump on board.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the very interesting things what you're saying is about this kind of experimentation, but also is about making an experience firsthand, so that you can try stuff out and feel how it acts and how it feels like and stuff like that. Can you provide maybe an example of how this? For that, you also have to create some sort of a safe haven, where this experimentation is possible, where you're not punished against, or if you're making mistakes and stuff like that. Can you provide an example of what are the conditions that you can do this experimentation and experiences firsthand? What is necessary for in order to be able to do that?
I think it's important to start small. In any way. So even if you're just working in a team, in an organization that doesn't have a lot of decision-making power to change these things, I think it's about opening up the conversation within that team of things you would like to do different, things that you are currently frustrated by that you would love to change. And then together with, or in the discussion around that frustration, start thinking about ideas or things you've seen in other places or heard in other places that might be able to solve that specific problem, that frustration that you have. It could be a very specific thing, like for example, the meeting structures, or the way you give feedback to one another, or the way you make decisions in an organization. Get the conversation going around where the frustration is, and think about and learn from pioneers on how you can actually do those things differently. So even on these super practical levels, for example, changing the way meetings are run, or the way decisions are being made within a small team, can boost the engagement of people and the motivation of people to a very high extent. In many cases, more than the big changes in organizational structure that will follow later on. So even these small changes can be very powerful. So I think it's important to start there, to think of even these small things that could change, that could help a team be more engaged at work. And once you have success in those early changes, then it's about trying to make those bigger changes and bringing in more people. And I think that's an important thing to do, because if you start small, can learn how to experiment. And of course, one of the requisites of that is that you have a bit of freedom to experiment. So you need to have, for example, a team leader who's also into this. If there's a person that's constantly pushing back on all of the initiatives that you take, then if you keep trying that and if you still don't get anywhere, then I suggest you leave and find another team in the organization, or maybe even a different organization to work for. Because I think it's also important to understand that if you can't change it, if you can't not change it, and if you continuously try to, but you get too much pushback from the organization, you might actually be a better fit in another organization where you have a bit more freedom to experiment with that new ways of working.
I see Carlo. Carlo, do you want to intervene?
Jean, yeah, I'm looking at time, and one of my roles is trying to get us and keep us within the timing. But we have our last 10 minutes, so my suggestion would be to stay together in these last 10 minutes. And there's two topics that I want to pick up out of what you have introduced in this very interesting Q&A. One is really the last one on the failures, mistakes, and making space for that. One thing that I have found extremely useful is was introduced by Amy Edmondson, a Harvard Business School professor, where she says it's very important to introduce a new language for failures and mistakes inside organizations. So we need to be able to distinguish mistakes and failures. That's not all one bucket, right? There are mistakes. If we know the process, we've done it, we have the skills, we've been trained, I think we have to understand that those kind of mistakes are not welcome by nobody. That would be silly, right? It's the mistakes that should be prevented. The good news is those mistakes are easy to fix, because we know already the solution to them is just something that should have not happened. Then there are other mistakes in complex situations. While we understand that the complexity of today's business is different, we're applying solutions that we know don't always work. That is where I find it very interesting. In organizations that are able to bring those mistakes to the surface as fast as possible, they are able to talk about them and fix them. They have a competitive advantage compared to those organizations that have a culture of silence, because they are scared to be punished if they bring a mistake to the table. And that is certainly something that can be avoided. And we know that this concept of psychological safety, which is very important in those organizations. And finally, there are the type of mistakes that are more, the desirable one, the one that we really want to do as fast as possible, because we are in an innovative process. So we want to learn fast from what doesn't work to build what works. And I wonder, have you found, Pim, in your, exploring different companies, that there is a maturity in handling mistakes differently in this type of more progressive organization? That is just not every mistake is free. It's just that they learn to talk about mistakes differently.
Yeah, very clearly we see that in these organizations. So They want to create, as you mentioned, this like psychologically safe work environment where people dare to try new things, because you can invite people to experiment, but if you punish them when things will go wrong, nobody in the entire organization will actually start experimenting. So these organizations take very practical steps sometimes to create more of this psychological safety. For example, by opening up the conversation around mistakes, where you have maybe every 2 or 3 weeks a session in which you only discuss the mistakes that were being made, where people admit their mistakes, which at first is already a painful thing to do. But if you get used to it, it feels much more comfortable, and people actually start listening to each other so they can learn from each other's mistakes and they won't have to make the mistake twice. So, for example, a company that's very strong on this is Spotify. When we visited them in their Stockholm headquarters, we learned about some of the things they do. So they have these every 3 weeks. They have these so-called fail sessions where they discuss the biggest failures they've made. They run a blog series on their intranet of people sharing the biggest mistakes that they've made. Once again, to create an environment where it's okay to admit your mistakes and to all make sure that you learn from it. Another one is what they do is that the CEO, Daniel Ek, gets on stage during town halls every 3 weeks and also talks openly about the mistakes that he made. Once again, to create a very safe work environment. Other companies organize fuck-up nights or similar things to constantly have a conversation around the things that are going well and also the things that are not going well. To celebrate it, to say, okay, we learned from this mistake, let's now continue not making the same mistake twice. And giving people the opportunity to be very open about it. And if I compare that to my corporate experience, that was the exact opposite. So if you made a mistake, your only goal was to make sure that nobody else figured out. And the problem was that nobody else learned from the mistake. And another problem was that the failure or the mistake that was being made could never be corrected because nobody knew about it. So we constantly had this mistake that was continuing through the organization and nothing was actually changing because people were scared to be open about it.
And you mentioned the fuck up night. I want to make sure that we remind to all the participants here and the one that are following that tonight there is this marathon today continues, and tonight at 8 p.m. there will be also the fuck up night with great guests that are sharing their fuck up accidents or lucky events, I would say. So I think we will post a link into the chat soon for those who want to sign up for the backup night. And then we still have a few minutes. The second point that you have introduced, Jean, was about the structure versus the freedom. And so who want more of what? And when I've met with Pim the first time, I was working in a university where we decided for our department to use a system called holacracy, which is a system of radical empowerment. And I remember I never worked in a more structured organization than holacracy. So yes, there were no manager, but in the absence of manager, what happens is that you build common rules. Then that structure could take the form of different ways. For holacracy, there was a constitution. But a lot of organizations, there is a myth that must be somehow reviewed, that if you don't have a hierarchy, you don't have structure or you don't have rules. Actually, most organizations that do use self-management, they have the experience and intensity of structure to support the work. It's just a very different type of structure, right?
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And there are a couple of those ideas about progressive organizations that I think are false. So for example, you say that the one that you mentioned, like in these maybe flat or self-managing organizations, there's no structure. That's, as you mentioned, wrong. There's a lot of structure, but in a different way. And it helps people to be more free within that kind of, those kind of boundaries. At the same time, in these organizations where there's no managers, people assume that there's also no leadership or there are no leaders. I think that's wrong too. Like in these self-managing organizations, you don't have people who are appointed to be a leader and promoted into leadership positions, but they have the opportunity to step up as leaders. And if they can make people follow them, then they will become a natural leader in the organization. So I would argue there's actually more leadership and more leaders in these progressive organizations than there are in traditional organizations where people might have manager title, but not really being a true leader in the sense of being able to create a following and to get people to where they want to go. So I think there's a couple of those important misassumptions or misunderstandings about these ways of working. And I think you mentioned a very good one, also the one on structure. So it's about looking beyond the buzzwords and the hypes and really looking at what are making these organizations different in terms of structures, in terms of leadership, etc., than those more traditional ones.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Carlo, if we have still time? One of the things that my students wondered about, and which I think could be, you were saying before, we have to start small, we have to start locally, and we have to be attentive to the small things. For example, how we structure a meeting, how we set up a certain atmosphere, how we make sure that we have this psychological safety where you can feel that you can expose your vulnerabilities and so on. One of the things that, I got some questions was around these changes that we witnessed this last year with the COVID-19 on a meeting, for example, much more virtually, where, for example, the spatial arrangement has changed a lot, and the boundaries between private and corporate has changed a lot. So a lot of these attentions to the small have changed quite a lot, and many of those are probably also here to stay. We are probably not having the same arrangement of meetings as we had before. We're certainly going back in some ways, but not altogether. So I was wondering, how do you see how this kind of cultural changes? Because a lot of the things that we're doing now with this screen meetings is that it's very functional, right? You meet because you have this talk and I ask my questions, and then a second later I'm gone and you're going home and whatever. So all this, the serendipity, the kind of more relational quality, you talked about experiences, and experiences is embodied, is actually going there. I very much appreciate it in your book that you describe how these people dressed and how these people, how places felt like, and talking about surfing and everything. So I was just wondering, how would you assess this virtualization of work in relation to your principles?
I think a couple of interesting things happened over the past 12 months. So first of all, before 2020, a lot of companies said we can never work remote. We can never allow our people to work from home because they will not work. They will focus their time on doing other things. We will go bankrupt if we give people the opportunity. It will be complete chaos. Well, interestingly, we learned kind of the exact opposite of that. So people are more productive. Some are actually more engaged. So if they don't have the problems at home or have to take care, for example, of their kids while they can't go to school, people who don't have that actually have higher engagement as well now working from home. So I think that's interesting in itself already. We've proven, or the pandemic has proven, that it can actually work for many organizations. What I think is important is to not just simply copy-paste the way of working of the office and bringing it into a virtual environment. So what we've seen over the past year is that many people who had a lot of meetings at the office now still have a lot of meetings, they just do them at home. And they don't really rethink their way of working. So they just take their physical environment to an online environment and not rethink their processes, their structures, the way they run meetings. So for example, a lot of the companies that have already for decades worked remotely, or for years worked remotely, they've created a whole new way of communicating, for example, with each other. And they don't constantly have meetings behind their laptops, but they communicate in other ways, in a more asynchronous way, where people do the work in their own ideal time and not when everybody has to come together during a meeting. So I think that's important to understand, that we shouldn't just take the physical environment and put it online, but also focus on creating new ways of working around this that better fit the environment, the new type of environment, and also that better fit what people should be doing in their work, and giving people more autonomy by giving them the opportunity to do the work, for example, according to their own ideal time. So I think it's important to understand that we shouldn't just bring the physical office to an online environment, but that we should also rethink other aspects of our way of working.
I would like to thank you, Pim, very, very much. We reached our time limit. We actually went over for a couple of minutes, but it's been extremely interesting. And I would like to thank you, Professor Jen, for your questions and reflections. What a wonderful day so far. Again, it's not over. Everybody is welcome to sign up for the Fuck Up Night tonight. And once again, thank you very, very much. And thank you for all who have followed us for the whole day and for this last session. Have a wonderful evening, and we will close it here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.